Here, make sure this is the right one.
It should be just in the folder.
It's the same one here.
Look, I was not here. I was like, you know, like, you're just happy with the package.
So it's 23
Like, I wasn't sure if you wanted to send it after. You're not gonna get that with
Did you ever beat the team that last year?
Are they clear? Are they on their way?
Did you ever lose to the team?
Yeah.
Why
Oh,
don't you
sorry.
invite them?
You're good.
Yeah, on the right.
Yeah, that's what I just asked.
I was being a little unserious. I thought it was a 4-1 team.
Do we have someone at Kentucky? Okay. Do we have someone in Georgetown? They are breaking. We have someone. Then we can then go to. Yes.
I mean, if you do.
Good luck, have fun.
Oh, I'm just saying.
Yeah, outlet is behind this thing. There are outlets.
Yeah. Alright, I'm gonna run to the back. Like work maybe is a little.
Hello. Stoops. Stuff. Yeah, this is better.
Yeah.
This is better. Yeah, I got so much sleep.
Lots of sleep.
It was like fresh. Actually, that.
Hey, which way did that EP flip?
They flip back into our net.
Yes, that's old.
Yep.
I hope that's a unique angle against perhaps Spark. Animal wipeout. Animal wipeout.
I'm really interested to hear Carly's thoughts on Animal Wipeout.
The disability cam.
That's true. The box is loaded, man.
Hey, Gordon.
He just gave up.
Missing Will. Oh, right, yeah. That's all. We were searching looking from that, we ran out of either or black, yeah, see it. We may have huge.
feel like it's fine. Of course, we're talking about the waste emission structure.
Yeah, wait, what's that?
You all are.
We're talking about per web. Thankfully, the debate is not going to be about that. There will be no discussion of the plans.
There could be discussion of like any impact.
And impact or perhaps plan text.
Yes.
Very likely.
think so little of us.
No, sorry, I'm talking about.
No, I.
It's correct, I do think that little of you.
No, there's some substance.
If hypothetically,
That's where it's going. To figure it out.
like purely hypothetically, there was a part in this 1C that maybe was criticizing a paper that you helped write.
That's really funny.
Would you be open to that?
No, I don't care about that. As long as it's not, because Michigan at one point read a card from me.
Yeah,
They transcribed the TD, not you two, but the Michigan team transcribed the TDI lecture I gave, where a Lappy asked me if climate change causes extinction. I'm like, no, probably not. So Michigan was like, ha ha!
That seems genius. I don't know. Like,
You can't reveal that right now.
Look at these seriously.
that's
why
crazy.
What did you happen to say?
They say climate change is an existential threat. I'll raise your dissents.
Thanks.
Have you read this card before, right?
I don't think so.
Okay. I was just gonna go find it, but
Hey, there's a
I'll let you give the speech.
the 1C has an under tag.
What's up?
The 1C card has an under tag. It's got AT Callahan lol.
Oh, that's really funny. Okay, well, if you don't get to the card, I still want to see it later. Oh, really? At one point, team read a card from Medium against him, and in the debate, he created a Medium account and wrote on Medium, like, this is unacceptable.
Gee, you run a little bit Northwestern.
Northwestern got so mad, I was so mad. Yeah. Like, this proves your counter-revolutionaries.
The only thing that they got mad about.
You're the enemy for doing this.
Ron was so obsessed with green cards from his dad.
Yeah.
Like, that's his favorite.
Yes, Ron Carson is that one's favorite. I just him do that all the time.
That's a solid one.
Right.
Oh, you really saw it, yeah? I just read it. I heard about it.
Oh, yeah, no, I saw that. That was you, okay. I did see you.
Like that's
Most likely, I'll be right here. All right, yeah, AJ, get up here.
No,
Oh, you can be in there. Oh, come on. No, I can't. We just gotta find someone that's interested from
we're. Yeah. Oh, it's.
You could just ask what else is on free. That's true, but it's a month, yeah.
We got another strike card.
Pick now. Yeah. You gotta, announce your votes here.
The openly deliberating.
Yeah. Maybe that's the first one meeting.
Ooh, okay.
Or we just have this decision made out. Consensus decision making. I always thought that'd be better. I'm not sure why. Jury deliberation.
Just figure it out.
Yeah.
Fair space. What shows that?
We're not broken. Tradable credit scheme to promote gigs.
Heard that one.
Apparently, being Michigan is missing 2 judges.
Oh.
You
Yeah, they didn't get to say right shit.
Yesterday, I think it is unusual when you got up for the 2 and C
Oh, that was
process.
so good. That was so good.
It was like, dude, fuck you again. It just goes, I'm back.
I do think that's the only debate I've seen where there were like 2 process sequences about literally 1 question.
What does the plan do? And then lots of machete shut up.
Yeah. I also just love watching Gear's face because I mean, dude loves the catty cross sex.
Eleanor started before me. Really? Oh, you're just. Yeah, I mean, you could change it. But, I mean, it's stuff like that. You can change it. So,
Yeah, I know, right?
Sorry, this beard is too good.
You might have to put yourself out this time.
True. Oh shit, actually, I don't know the judge. Yeah, my name was referenced in this debate. I don't know if it's like that. Sorry about that. How many process times?
Wait, not that many.
One. Two.
Only 6? Oh, 7.
Three. It's not that
4.
many.
5.
Oh, God.
Oh, and DDAP. There we go.
Would you consider states to be a process?
No.
No, but we also attach federalism and Conca.
Yes, that's true. That's a good point.
In like a separate doc.
No, it's in the text.
States plus uncommon.
Oh shit, it's in the text. See, I would have dropped it. I didn't even see it.
That's what this is like. Think about this as like internal versus external method. Like
Yeah.
states and politics doesn't matter.
That's fine. Yeah, no, I understand.
No, we have that's okay, I think.
Fuck, they did recon coming at NDA at the same time.
There he is.
Hey, just list last night. Oh, look at list, I'm not on the list.
Yeah.
It's fucked up, actually.
Exactly.
Calvin double check.
I'm double
That'd be a double check.
He's trying to come at me.
Actually, effectively, I was just reading that one.
No well on this list.
Wow. I know, right? It's like, surprise, you're actually judging. Sorry, y'all.
No, just let me know when you're good.
I just need one sec. Hey, hold on.
Plan. The United States federal government should adopt a clean energy policy for decarbonization in the steel sector, including a market-based instrument. Advantage one is industry. Domestic steel is substantially cleaner than international counterparts.
Just go.
Counterparts against the United States competitive advantage that displaces imports from the domestic market. Equal 21. U.S. steel have advantage over competitors in the legislative public counterparts. Deliver competitive advantage to domestic steel makers. Such as steel have to pay a fee. Come to the U.S. for represented to remove overseas. U.S. steel and more for carbon convention overseas will pay a higher price. Also, for competitors to lower emissions and carbon dioxide. Carbon price could decrease steel imports by nearly half. That will secure more U.S. manufacturers and specifically adopting a low carbon product standard restores domestic competitiveness and creates the industry. Kennedy 23 sector-based border adjustment max driven by the sense that yields carbon intensive drivers to literally drive decarbonization. LCBS creating trading scheme for products whose intensity is lower or credits create incentives to make investments to lower emissions. Companies earn money to provide strong incentives to ensure that manufacturers don't compete by inputs only because ensure manufacturers and incentives to decarbonize will bolster competitiveness. U.S. manufacturers and domestic steel is critical to build a readiness. The United relies on steel and important but national security risk. U.S. mills have vital reliance on imported steel, supporters of defense steel, vital and defensive critical relationships are armament security and security that back accuse only American steel. Provide troops of the United States with viable domestic production that makes it possible to make investments that Military certification of lose liability and work labor mixed years cannot be recovered, and declining competitiveness causing extinction due to trans failure and case order. Johnson 24 years old, capable of deterring no measure as less than no better. Counter one and holds Ukraine prevented around treated industrial state days and better ratings to be with the predicted difference between the from deterrence failure to respond. Not only political deterrence to the economy and industrial state, the backside making innovation. Stations military war effective and war speaking deterrence China's specialty self degree. Response for the U.S. expansion is not being complicated struggle the centerpiece and Chinese expansion cements a new world order. Extinction 2019, the BRC challenges diplomacy to place of the international order, security, peace, seeks overall nations and governments, declining equality, but if it's in Paris, the LA consolidation. It's sacred to believe that Bailey was the only teacher as many was feeling a choice. Submission to the face of war, deputy the powerhouse opposite the world, China, China, Americas, position the breast of the PRC and readiness to also create power conflict in every theater maintains the U.S. led world order, bringing 24, China's massing, by Ukrainian central peace, reclaiming perfection, reverse safety, U.S. led order, Beijing trigger, after progression, tension, the U.S. then, concussion, the larger aggression trigger, war fighting, new arsenals against each other, two wars, or capabilities of the capability of the U.S. military, relative to challengers, and independently low CO2, domestic steel industry is critical to U.S. leadership, mitigating host action of threats, foster 24, the role of steel, and economic stability has become evident, maintaining CO2 is still critical to the U.S. as a leader to democracy and climate compensate Ukraine along with China, and restore important demands, and steel must spur competitiveness. The industry was warming, there's substantive momentum for industrial decarbonization, but market-based policies are key to spur innovation and constant 24 momentum is needed funding is just a faction 1.1 trillion immediate other policies include advanced policies like LCS to waste essential accelerated programs to ensure American products are competitive and steel decarbonization is inevitable requires market support. Williams 35 cleaner steel has already begun the U.S.'s best suited solutions for crisis significant investment clean steel is not currently competitive as fast. The butcher has become cost or particularly fail the U.S. can emerge as a leader of risk getting mass-based sacrificing advantage but also market share prescribing nutrient investment change with simple public policies including market support and decarbonizing steel spills over and lower costs for critical low carbon technologies. Durgan 22 driving emissions out of steel is key decarbonization rates early when they keep warming below 1.5 now such as life cycles mean that plants for 23 weeks of manifold plants to be operating before 23 with the second lower reduction to help the plan to stay within 1.5 decarbonization steel unlock decarbonization of the economy enable zero carbon commitments service construction automotive transport energy packaging area to wafer hydrogen CCS helping to bring down costs and steel enables emissions reductions across the board. Stamp 23 2 billion tons of steel produced green steel will become the emissions to automated construction transportation energy manufactured steel and also vehicles carbon footprint green steel would automatically reduce our carbon emissions and warming costs extinction SRAB 24 the climate system are reaching 2.6 centuries faster than prediction models happening now later processes on the guide to the future alternatives respected threats society of from the apartment for us also corals collapse AMOC control collapse disability collapse doomsday glaciers new collapse suffer CS of the lost river hustle geologies for years of emission the wind so genus source in the monsoon sending to cost dynamic recently collapse absorbing collapse of AMOC 90% of recurrent can happen within decades of close seasons have the world to dry a majority of scientists consider more than 30 catastrophic events and famous waste and source often unless emissions decline only the average direction rejections are effective in reducing climate risk whether result in failures in critical system water security energy trade security the IPCC the government 2.6 the reason to no return how extreme like capacity to stop warming and protect exists at 1.5 degrees and worsening warming guarantees global conflict routes to returns and causes resource conflicts. Macintosh 25 extreme heat and humidity change degrees faster than ITS into moving ways closer being to see geopolitical consequences that entire country disappear Russian collapse of permanent conflict and oil improve the most of the food monsoons guarantees and agriculture changes climate shifts include relevant US nuclear sea level extreme world weather warming and sheltering impacts the world technological and developers people being to slap avoidable vital fires from unmanaged needs to underground rendering accessible temperatures reduce air capacity with capability climate change reaching borders 3 billion places or allergens must relocate 50% of world population country where those who affect the Chinese 2.0 conflict numbers watch security increase in place people across borders having national nations something that's just they're wrong confident cannot land experts with evidence to keep shooting planes nobody has them countries one bag voices of labor starvation Russian video create obvious permanent man police country desperate no country will escape political and economic consequences and adaptation fails it's too contentious there's no sufficient funding Hill 25 difficult to garner support for adaptation has no still the past government policies from lack of funding less than numbers and residential assets challenge models to large scale complexity towards progress adaptation grants planning the reactions to seawall drive flooding into neighbor communities cleaning it out and political cycles politicians resulting in NDT and money measures that people popular product leaders in large markets for scalable compliance FE25 mandatory standards lead builders in other markets manufacturing reduce emissions are expected to continue to have production method for their whole supply chain standards create incentives to decarbonize for significant export market and adopting a low carbon product standard for the steel sector drives green innovation for instance 21 shipping comparison requires decarbonizing industry like steel requires fossil fuels like fuels and vendors and manufacturers to reduce carbon intensity companies selling reporting must comply with receive surrender credits which direct management standards to reduce emissions intensity LCB supremacy adopting innovation different single standard investment reduce will pay us during the point where producers and importers make their sale US receive credits on the average emissions intensity below benchmark credits are tradable standards based on intensity measures should include direct and indirect emissions values makers together to determine the distribution of just leakage of performance standard should apply to importers addition to domestic producer electricity prefer CA could not cover imported products because WPL CCUS could capture emissions but see another opportunity and credit trading is necessary to lower the cost of green steel making Feldman 21 OCBS provides incentives to reduce CI provides incentives to reduce intensity production for activation for increasing need to reduce intensity drag single to long-term incentives to reduce the cost of lead to more tech necessary to realize deep carbon emissions simple Feldman 21 products to cover refinancial sales and finance point regulation that is part of the point of variables comply with rewarded balancing capacity with coverage benefits losing location warning standards should include scope emissions to important role dependent on emissions and the other exclusion making possible benchmark standards to percentage of averages benchmark decrease compared to opportunities for clear signals reporting of producers and importers social limit judges complexity ensure coverage emissions deficit levels competition 3 times average reporters and enable override companies obligations render credits equal to excess standard of all products sold in imported and ensure foreign markets will have advantage to minimize complexity the correct plan scratch the first one the United States federal government should adopt a clean energy policy for industrial metals including a low carbon product standard we apologize my bad Advantage 3 is alignment, harmonizing carbon pricing on steel and aluminum revitalizes salt gas negotiations that springs U.S., EU, French, or abroad alliance collaboration. Section 23, Gasser reaches applied towards sustainability negotiations, solid different approaches to linking access to zero to solid and deal shell gas would record shift to which democracies use trade to address shared problems and level block with trade and partnerships with critical international authorities. Any kind of agreement with line trade and counter abuse of strength relations gas include shares so you can't trade countries the steel and aluminum or slide out. I mean, mission of the alliance design on making global agreement time market assets manufacturing shape production creating future low carbon deals offering creative democracy to influence trade institutions of financial to strengthen co-operative but opting carbon price of metals allies US-EU trade policy. Section 23, EU which is seeming to become a role legislative industry the public sector EU US reflection there's centralized nationalities lining market rental lists and Islamic Coast Legion harmonized policy Chinese steel surge fair rates open production rate prices harmony industry trade gas represents body effort risk in the miles in Southeast Asia with trade distorting practices gas protecting industry rivers trade the bottom of the system under pressure under demand no longer Russian gas for relevance using WTO procedure vehicle reproperty WTA gas will offer so trade atlas therefore move down low cost and any to put activity here amount of benefits traded low carbon goods of pro choice consensus which is alignment with growth in supply chains and that unlocks effective supply chain management via delivery scaling grab 24 US EU closer against the electronic side of market have geopolitical politics under so rational for domestic co-op reduce the events of Russia and China EU US become because of China for supply chains university may set the first order reserve and well by protect the actions paper open district to complete China from joint trade the WS brain window walls translated cooperative reforms multi solutions and heated democratic cooperation reversing goal vaccinating Section 23 gas pre-relations of no starts getting whatever the authoritarian gas being brought into democracy global south and pacific US cooperative which is the regulation of investment in tech able to block in partnership to resting ensuring that policy set the rules of the road and alignment is key to build a risk quick alliance that can take globalized threats Europe 22 strategic sectors globalized failure to the US and Europe is a dangerous spillover alliances sites of the living factor globalization will that both system of community blocks and motivated systems will place in their role for democracy related world critical to US stay on the same page and trains the foundation of powerful transatlantic ties extinction last year 21 the alliance of link global threats we face tremendous challenges global threats such as climate terrorism global translated partnership the European will strong part of the joint for global order trade useless and relations confidence the global trade order the arc problems for fashion Middle East Central Asia civil and the United States countries that partners contribute to lasting order and only translating to alignment checks the existential digital cooperative failures type again 22 coming to the main strike historically governance in AI number one digital based today with social equal relationship travel policy this ability to automate digital evolution to service marketing ecosystem you auto training solutions but we need alliances managing exit threats for jobs for AI for managers class surveillance democracy crisis polarization clever crimes and attacks on the digital war the internet shows governance possible debate spin framework under political conditions generate governance and authoritarianism blocks and existential risk democracy solved healthy movement to tolerance states more war less cooperative better practice where they better workers and risk major wars this calculated by the technology conversation of WTO versus correct co-ops such as dynamic summit AI biotech bottlenecks are part of the risk of locking in such as HI space life center surveillance of trafficking which is extinction and data authoritarianism and also global miscalculation for wars and cascading tech vulnerabilities extinction mass 20 authoritarianism introduces vulnerabilities and tests others but it miscalculations without the terms surrounding nations ability to change have existential consequences of authorities and perpetual info wars to back legislation authorities and lethal during epidemics AI is bill and overall action of ways democracy limit slow governance bureaus vulnerable discrimination attacks historical environmental wars into such as survival authoritarian create vulnerabilities and appropriate guards and accident resulting cascading failures susceptible to attack. Okay, I'm good for processing.
Ready? What's the difference between the plan you sent and the one that died?
The old plan was from a previous round. That was our fault. The new plan that Avi sent is the correct one.
Okay, I'm just asking because I literally think they're the same thing.
Industrial metals can apply to things more than steel, like aluminum.
Okay,
solve
well,
the third thing.
let's circle back to that. Cap and trade. Does the app create that system?
Well, it is an intensity-based cap, and then it creates a tradable credit system that can
So
be
that-
used to meet your obligations under that cap.
Does the plan cap the overall emissions of the steel sector?
It caps emissions intensity at the firm level, which we think is a cap. But if you read evidence that says that that's not a cap, that's obviously a debate to be had.
Okay.
We think emissions-intensive caps are caps.
Does the plan include a border adjustment?
What do you mean border adjustment?
So if we import steel from another country, is that steel priced according to its carbon
The
intensity?
plan applies to imports, which is the reason the states can't do it, but border adjustment carries connotations that I don't think the plan would do, like pricing at the border. It applies to imports.
Okay. Branch of the federal government that you think does the plan?
There are multiple branches that could do the plan. For example, existing legislative authorities could implement a low carbon product standard for industrial metals, but that product standard would be less effective than a congressionally authorized one that the plan would likely do.
Okay, so which agencies do you think need to be involved for solvency?
Well, enforcement would likely be by the EPA. I don't think we've read a 1AC card that describes that process. There's a 2AC. Yeah, the 2AC card says that unless it's congressionally authorized, it wouldn't be effective because it wouldn't apply to upstream emissions because existing legislative authorities only permit regulation of downstream steel emissions, and existing legislative authorities don't allow the EPA to apply that standard to imports, which
Okay.
solves advantage 1 and 3, and probably 2 as well.
Industrial metals. What are those? What
Steel,
counts?
aluminum, etc. Like to for today.
Important, etc. What does that mean?
Steel, aluminum could be more if you read a definition of the phrase in the plan.
Well, you read the plan. I'm asking
Steel,
you what
aluminum.
the plan means.
Yeah.
Steel,
As per the
aluminum.
plan, it's key for those two metals for the third advantage. But if you broaden
Okay.
the scope of that, you will
And you
do that.
cannot possibly generate a deficit to a counterplan that does steel and aluminum, correct?
No,
We all agree.
we wouldn't read like applies to, like we could read an add-on, for example, about other metals.
I look forward to it. Alignment. Why does being misaligned with Europe in one area implicate the relationship
Our Sutton,
in other areas?
our Sutton evidence and the next piece of evidence, our Sutton evidence, says that trade policy is the necessary and sufficient condition for cooperation on other issues because it forms the foundation for transatlantic ties. The evidence is pretty good that GASA, which is the Atlantic's steel and aluminum deal, is necessary, and aligning that policy is necessary to spill over to other areas of cooperation, because the reason that other areas of cooperation has failed is because of the lack of negotiation on GASA.
Okay, 1 NC has been sent. It's 8 off, advantage 3, and then 1, and then 2.
What's the advantage order again?
3, 1, 2.
3, 1, 2.
Okay, are all 5 judges good?
Think about that.
And Callahan, you're good. And Michigan, are you good?
We're good.
Everybody? Alright.
First off, the metals make the nice ability to adopt the clean range of multi steel and aluminum, low carbon products, standard pricing, carbon industry, tech, and phosphorus, obviously, central isolation, code 22, high tech, post industrial side, destroy the primary product inputs, so really intended by the you should make every effort to increase domestic production, carbon reduction, typical process, environmental sources, and body, they're embracing self strategy that will slow and admit to adoption, good technology, everywhere, carbon reduction is a small price paid for education, to conversation, insurance, manufacturing, PB24, carbon liquid, industry, innovation, carbon critical and industrial progress, it's essential to various application, contribution of it, significant manufacturing, it's ongoing importance, skills, role, tech, and economic transmission, next off trade, take the United States, federal government should adopt a national policy for industrial including low carbon products and mandate trading, lower emission reductions, the regulation without the market is preferable, only 24, and temporary government acts and program to sell goods and law sales can destroy the contribution, water benefit, and security to measures, emission reduction, justify banning trading, caps that themselves, make sure reduction goals are achieved, it may be worth lawsuits, substitute caps without trading, lower the cost of compliance is bug, not a feature, only raising cost guarantees, rapid innovation, increasing in 7, trading, weak incentive for innovation, low cost facilities will provide more than the total reduction, high cost facilities will provide less than total reduction, high cost for not innovation, so lower the cost of producing compliance with trading does not encourage innovation, high innovation to reduction through high to low cost facilities, less incentive for innovation, high cost savings catalyst for innovation, there's a trade opportunity, short-term efficiency that trading promotes, and environmentally superior tech innovation if states impose restricted reduction requirements, utilities, which fuels, but trading allows them to change to the operators issue innovation in favor of with the off-the-shelf technology next off substance 4 means directly realizing point 89. The question of whether participants were risking money for gain, the term 4 is used to describe directly realizing as a result of risk-taking decarbonization is to efforts to remove carbon from all economic activities. Dorothy 22 decarbonization is defined as efforts to remove carbon from all economic activities, violation of the after incentivized emission reductions for all economic activities, voted for those ground and list substance on top of all MBI mechanisms, spread the name research burden too thin, integrate the topic of vicious cycle of tiny acid backlog garbage next off to pick the United States Commission adopt a non-energy environmental protection policy for industrial metals, including a low carbon product standard EPA cells 123 EPA enforcement action with the climate change EPA enforcement compliance activities including criminal civil federal facilities including enforcement EPA enforcement full rate EPA conflicts including GG limits on other pollutants as new climate rules are developed. They will be prioritized EPA rules for meaningful reductions in emissions to enforcement action. Climate change environmental policies not energy policy authority agencies dividing line line rate disintegral energy for environmental policy user range methods is included accounts of energy policy spending and oversight energy and environmental policy are commonly thought of in the same terms, yet the policy in these two areas require different energy and environmental difference producing different policy outcomes. Each policy realists reflect characteristics evident funding oversight legislation funding resource allocation and funding division regarding energy involved funding. I do assess funding I use budget authority for the DOE next off trade off TA DOE labs are locked in on next generation reactors and nuclear dominance wide 215. Applied energy last play the crucial role of innovation by supporting advanced nuclear reactors and fuel cycles work with energy demonstrated and deploy next generation nuclear advanced reactors with nearly completion in the next few years will enable private sector demonstration, risking tanks for commercial adoption by leveraging the innovation ecosystem of applied energy labs and fancy advocating to automate grids and disaster recovery, discover resources, minerals, and resources for nuclear focus efforts to slow develop and deploy new reactors, whole potential for example reduce nuclear playing costs, all these spaces ensure dominance in nuclear for another generation. National labs are ace in the hole of what it was with this competition. The plans covered for mission intensity tracking loops into UE's national labs, mission 24, responsibility to calculate the missions, both agencies tracking mission into UE's national labs, primary responsibility labs, we have supported in our views less controversial than other entities labs are connected to university partners and trade work with the views to sound the foreign pollution being anti-personally governed working group under the leadership of UE labs of the distributed emissions intensive reducing for production. The EP does not enjoy about principle the national labs do and it does not collect data for foreign emissions. The resulting unforeseen shifts in priorities collapses DOE execution of existing missions Smith 25 and organizations have racing companies like DOE change the use of disruption or operations and productivity create bureaucratic complexities risk has been a rushing to reorganizations. Financial costs can be staggering employees and leadership to divert time and focus on critical projects have been dragging longer than anticipated when intervening. How this bears responsibility to reset personnel reorganizations to introduce unforeseen costs and delays to disruption and existing DOE projects key to non-prolife on 24 comes to reliability with supplies, service, limited US muscle countering expanding levels of nuclear export strength peace by mitigation proliferation of reactors repair and common advantage for the US and Russia's actions around Syria provide example of rapid simulation of nuclear robust domestic nuclear support critical defense capabilities ready to fuel domestically and direct advantage readiness and over leverage of holding out proliferation of commercial presence without nuclear the Morocco withhold from under these as threats as emerge as Ukraine raises intentions as the Middle East reinforcing our overseas commitments and maintaining strong non-political essentials to President United States further proliferate nuclear rules 25 40 additional states to advance nuclear development surrender nuclear development security states are not always stable around us over the Pakistan face wave after a wave invincibility when states on nuclear others have all being followed bombs over the Pakistan every leader was getting every route to station rider every time we're boom history is marked by President Jackson's budget turns next off the 119th Congress should abandon federal clean energy policy and its budget blueprint that unlocks CCJA expansion by expanding by repealing the IRA locus 327 repealing IRA key tax cuts IRA cuts cost 4 temperature announcement permitting the CCJA without any budget rules mirroring IRA's cuts for the revenue loss only staunch amendment keeps tax cuts on track the plan and perm violate the House Freedom Caucus and clear red line of no clean energy T FP 322 Freedom Caucus Charles Levine Trump's bill warning Trump must be got green energy filler could appeal the final bill's passage in the House green energy Trump vows to eliminate Republicans refuse not going to bill through the House green energy would jeopardize Trump's agenda to make the taxes burn a key to space called but condition 24 plus and tax taxes Congress passed taxes in commercial space companies after now the money to build out rocket taxes in commercial space smaller companies lower the cost of advocating into tax increase their hub space cannot affect both extinction asteroids volcanoes biomes war dropping one more makes it trying to argue 21 multi-planetary protecting human race 1 in 6 years ago using long-term resurrect central asteroids on kindergarten civil solutions nuclear or bioweapons establishing small outposts risk of being destroyed simply give retail diversify the most mitigation strategy next off to MBI organization instruments must price mitigations to be attacked ETS missile 10 the starting point for a compulsive market makes the student externalities and the odds of neutral. A market makes instrument defined to refer to nature with the most change derived via copper, either derived via tax or derived via common trade, like renewal trade, reduce if it's not globalizing MBI trading. Credit does not force internalization of the emissions externality bolster water management well. The credit trading that polluters not pay for pollution for that reason insurable. Prefer credit trading polluters pay only for abatement not for pollution. Voter 1 limits of carbon pricing its open season subsidy removal over increases equal labeling lab reductions and any subset combination of those two ground credit trading means the does not disincentive fossil fuels consumption since they can say a tax center really adds demands for energy. You should be ultra protective of the net ground after Liberation Day. 90% of our drop box of industry. French Roy wants to use watches, but walk over first into business and bulldoze above countries, French waging French Roy, the practice will mean transacting only countries, small levels above what is out here when you're showing helps to increase resilience in the US before was applied to domestic growth. There's no need for related to prepare for innovation to reduce the amounts of Western countries across French Roy, but advance and technology keep the peace. French Roy would exclude poor countries to become the beaver trade become richer. These countries become failed states, grounds for exporters and development, souls, extinction, war 22. As countries get richer, the people get better countries invading institution, first one improves with quality, more government switching, the get down to extension rights, first groups celebrate, more careful, also innovation, more development, reduce extension risk, particularly the pandemics and malnutrition, making the immune systems income, enables secure countries to invest in health infrastructure based population response pandemics and makes it difficult to exist and change terrorism crime. Greenland alone sinks the EU relationship to over 2-3 Greenland could sink this relationship that out of the sovereign of Danish territory there's no other territorial small Denmark is foundation of NATO and the EU Trump's not ruled out force of course and compelled the Europe movers to make it a choice. China doesn't export its model, the West is forced to take it to one. China does not export its model. GSP other sort of questions are given re-emerged in authoritarian new tech and indefeasible China can display the tag which favors authoritarian regimes tech and sorts of idols by liberal Western countries Sweden, Norway, Israel. There's a similar issue there's usually one in creative Beijing democracy so equals bad people 18 different and Hitler's in Commonwealth pollution biodiversity waste proliferates cyber financial and quality down migration integration of terrorists presence and frustrated with performance development about parts dangerous rent seekers and detachment are responsive for preferences fail to be translated into policy and then it's one. No China war, the PLA is unprepared for combat. T-25, the PLA remain unprepared for war, focused on upholding C-speed role. Commanders naturally training experience, a shortage of staff, lack of understanding of committed tactics. Taiwan's importance is overseen that the CPs thrive without Taiwan for 70 years. Speeches that outline top threats, against mentioned Taiwan, they have the corruption, legitimately forward being example of fair to lose major species. They advocate for the military, made planning of revenue, studying how China get into defeat forces, surface, and lack of purpose. Will be raised question about how much after the PLA is really applying. China's water region on Congress. Taiwan said that the PLA upholds C-speed role. China lacks the means to motive for center order wise 23 assessment of China's base here. Phrasing from propaganda overlook the gap between reality for nuclear seekers replace the U.S. China's development largest limited by needs at home. Beijing prefers peaceful unification. China could lose a war and face sanctions. These would be devastating. Show that's regime security and rejuvenation facing economic headwinds and strict revelation. There is a broad recognition China remains military technological bigger and competition against one access to a stable order. Force projection fails. Distance and introducing between the before the folly of hedge was that limited wars proved not only cosmic rulers supported by the least wealthy sides of the planet. U.S. military supremacy built overcome geography against the military and ultimate defense more nationalism creates between the interest of population and the U.S. One AC foster does not say extinction and contains nothing resembling a terminal impact advantage to the after assault mission steals a tiny fraction of overall GHGs in other countries. Some super adaptation now salty and power grasp before. Adaptation has been a huge success story. We have observed universal power yields, reduction in malnutrition, famines, accident waters, increased common disease, increased mortality data, extreme speed of declining tests for disaster climate change. We are innovating faster centers overall. We show super adaptation, empirical evidence of declining vulnerability. Climate has to show declining death rates and damages, yields of benefit from varieties, including genetic modified versions that are resistant to diseases and adverse weather, fertilization, irrigation, mechanization. These overall negative impact. The integration of adaptive basic forms of complete diversification from repealable successes. Human activity has zero observable effect on weather extremes rejected by studies ground 25. Evidence gaining extreme weather seems in tension with the IPCC. There is no rise in temperatures, flooding, droughts, aridity, and fire. Extreme events are more likely to undercome change are overrepresented within studies. Extreme droughts become less frequent and intense. Overall, consensus was total tries to underwarming. The studies overwhelmingly samples of droughts are more intense and warming decreased droughts overall, but increased intensity within the sample. Research choose events or studies that have made more severe journals likely to publish studies or more significant effects of the ecosystem is characterized by accuracy. Mission is to raise awareness. Climate wars are debunked by large ends. Data sets cooperation more likely 125 or 23. It is outrageous to see how about these people aggressive 1% how about environmental problems can be catalyst for carbon environmental limits makes steps to more action places dealing with the scarcity of management. Water wars after program for 2,500 years come as the door and hostile parties work together facing common environmental threats. Next off, the United States Commission provides substantial incentives, including financial incentives, removal of all federal barriers and states and territories, adopting a clean energy policy for international including low carbon product standard reliance on state enforcement stalls, best deployed multi-plug 13 Congress giving states option to surface primary insurance about allowing states to experiment states become more experts in FG does not have sufficient personnel, state introduce or more expert programs that differ from regional variation, Congress identify states experimentation, state administration, making sanctions more politically palatable, running controversial programs through states diffuse federal accountability, these increased power below the radar.
You have 20 seconds. You want to read tipping points code?
Okay, back to advantage 3, or 2. Tipping points are gradual, black scientific is more white 3. The common sense for social change and sales components change over a millennia. Archie sometimes they live to emissions, eruptions, among circulation, and then related to response, methane response, gradually really true over millennia. Headlines, seasonal worst case impacts, invoking industry hypothesis, don't brought methane release.
Body okay for the last part?
Yeah.
Yes.
Status?
Conditional.
The trade pick. This piece of evidence is not specific to steel. Where do you think that you've made Turn's case in the context of that?
Well, I think it is in the context of steel because this Dreisen evidence does a survey of industry data on innovation. This is that higher costs are more likely to spur innovation. They increase rewards for first movers and innovators since they have the ability to charge higher prices.
I guess is the net benefit just trading bad, or is there something else?
Yeah, it's just a straight turn to the case.
Okay.
Although I think we would also say that the DOE DA is a net benefit as well.
DOE is a net benefit. Why?
Because we wouldn't, it links less because wouldn't have to measure the emissions intensity of tradable credits.
And then so
But emission, you don't measure intensity of credits. You measure intensity at the firm level. I don't understand why that is.
Well, if a firm is like, okay, our emissions intensity is this much below the standard, when they sell those credits, that still has to be verified.
sure. I guess that brings me to the next question. The link for the DOE DA. Where does this evidence say that intensity necessitates the trade-off? It just says it would be responsible for calculating, but it doesn't say that would crush existing efforts.
It's the following part, the Smith part that substantiates our trade-off argument.
Well, this one's just like we would divert attention, but it doesn't say that we would just give up necessarily on nuclear reactors. What do you think you substantiated that claim?
Well, divert time and focus from mission critical projects is about as sick as it possibly can be.
I guess why do you think it would rise to the level of quote billions of dollars that are diverted?
I mean, I think you're underestimating how hard it is to measure the intensity of the app. So when we not only assess imported products for firms in the United States, we have to figure out scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions intensity, which are way up the value chain.
Politics, is it just the Freedom Caucus that opposes or anyone else?
Correct, just the HFC.
Does it require Trump to intervene to get them on board, or is it just them disagreeing?
Our link is not about Trump.
Okay. Why is this one thing sufficient to derail the entirety of TCGA if it's if they're in status quo surrendering to Trump's intentions?
So I think you have to frame it through the uniqueness counter plan, which gives the HFC the red line that they've asked for of no new clean energy. Them bowing to like Trump, I don't really know why that would implicate our DA. Since this is a core belief of the HFC, it's not really about overall GOP belief.
Sure. I guess MBI, it's just 2 apps, correct?
2 mechanisms.
So, what is the distinction between cap and trade based on intensity versus the cap?
Would you like me to answer that question with Brett?
Tabs right now.
You just don't like use specific.
Advantage 1, Advantage 2, Advantage 3,
Advantage 1 is industry.
Industry warming alignment.
There we go, thank you.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Industry warming alignment, T subsets, TMBI, the industrial metals pick, the Department of Energy pick,
Decarbonization of all, TMBI,
the industrial metals
metals
pick.
thing, and then the next thing is the EPA thing.
Sorry, the next thing is actually Lopez, not the DOE thing.
States thing.
Then it's DOE. Then it's the trading pick. Then it's the DOE trade-off DA. And then it's the politics team.
one more time.
Yeah, the Octas. T decarb is all. TMBI. The industrial metals pick. Lopez. The DOE pick. The credit trading pick. The DOE trade-off DA, and then the politics team. Okay, is everyone good? Okay.
Yes, China war doesn't assume lack of manufacturing competitiveness meant to turn to the bedrock of American foreign policy deterring Russia and China from aggressing and hostile Taiwan and East Europe. Otherwise, nuclear war is inevitable. That's our Johnson evidence. Yes, Chinese leadership doesn't assume that they're aggressing and hostile Taiwan and the status quo, rise, causes extinction, and bolsters military expansion, and prevents cooperation in international public goods and international space. That's our winged evidence. Our evidence is not about force reduction. It's about the little capabilities that the U.S. has to deter our adversaries. It does succeed because it imposes high costs on escalation. Military readiness prevents extinction. Adversaries are probing the U.S. for weakness across multiple theaters. Strong American deterrence imposes high costs on escalation prevents escalation. Otherwise, nuclear war. That's our brands. And back to the evidence. War making advantage. They've dropped the absolutes globally because enforcing compliance in other markets. They've dropped that sales over to other industries because it serves as a critical input in lower cost of technology. No adaptation. They've conceded or hill evidence that says it's too contentious and complex. There's no political will or funding for it. Warming does cause extinction and destroys food supply, leading to famine and overwhelms enough capacity by hurling wildfires, rising sea levels, and natural disasters all at once. Biodiversity deforestation and ocean acidification ensures environmental collapse and a shipping point. That's extinction. That's right. We do cross tipping points soon. Arctic permafrost, Canadian forests, and tropical coral reefs or carbon bombs that ensure accidental warming after quick emission reductions. Independently dropped warming causes conflict, resource scarcity, and shifting economic patterns guarantee adversarial aggression against the United States and each other. They've conceded that seaboard rise hurts the credibility of the nuclear deterrent because island bases flood, guaranteeing domestic calculations that lead to nuclear war. That's Macintosh alignment. French trading does have cooperation. They don't have evidence about Gaza. Our evidence says that Gaza is the key. Internally holding on cooperation and other initiatives in the status quo, which is key to solve AI bad, and the EU model is good. China does export their norms because it proves that the status quo proves that they're aggressing against the US-led world order, and they're developing new technologies, which means that the US and the EU need to cooperate to check back against that. The alignment checks extinction, geopolitical fractions, and China-led cooperation is necessary to check back against climate terror, civil war, pandemics, and more. US-EU cooperation is key. Digital governance stops extinction, artificial intelligence, digital warfare, causing miscalculations, surveillance, will literally increase the risk of every existential threat to societal resilience. Democracies do solve public goods because they authoritarians are captured by elites. They cause extinction, cooperation, exercise, and democracy. They're less linked to humans to calculate in types of conflict. That's Belfield. T-substance. 4 means intended to further base 13, quarters health 4, intended to further force define 2. Further decarbonization means process of reducing GHG emissions, IBM 19, the decarbonization process of reducing CO2 and other emissions. Prefer at 1, Afghan economy-wide boxes out, innovation and Greenland, thousands of random industry pits. Lack deficits 2, over limiting 2, unworkable and crimes that in-depth research 3, functional limits, states, regulations, industry and economy, energy terms. And topic is 4, reachability, they race to the bottom, and cost substance spread out, TMDI. We made violations to be assessed based on the plan. Any of those standards are arbitrary. The plan features and intensity-based costs and tradable credits inserted from 1AC. For instance, that means capture and use capture 12. Capture explain types of costs output. Interest is specific relative to expense output. Assigning a target based on the credit that receive tradable credits below. Based on MBS or tax or proxy markets, not one MBS are externalized by either incorporating costs of first-putting activity into private cost of taxation by creating property rights and proxy market for tradable performance MBS. Propagate reflection choice of tech or strategy. Preferred 1 after the box of innovation. And leaving the sitting down to state that discourages research 2 over limiting the earnable S 2 out fields to make the topic sale. And biasing debate in favor of the next 3 arbitrariness, tradable performance, compensate pollution reduction, and penalize emissions that's industry from any critical analysis of market interest, cost by functional limits, and reasonability, the copper pit. Prove they counterplan industrial metals are steel and aluminum policy. 21 industrial metals, coal, aluminum, coal is key and steel. They do not have a piece of evidence that defines the phrase in the plan industrial metals in the 1 and T. New competition arguments the block means that we get new competition arguments in the 1 are permutation to both. It shows the link because it would apply the standard more intensely to steel and aluminum, which would advantage copper in the interim. No evidence, there's no internal net benefit, and for the same reason it cannot solve the warming advantage because no evidence says the low carbon product standard is bad. It says that we should not be biased against copper mining, which the plan does not do. It says that we should make sure that copper mining is not environmentally intense, which does not reduce the intensity, which does not reduce the ability for them to mine. In the status quo, conditionality is a voting issue. It causes traps to and times to because they can proliferate arguments in the 1 and T with no responsibility. It causes argument of irresponsibility because there's no base. They don't have to go for everything in the 1 and T dispo solves because it allows for observation in the process. Lopez is illegitimate if he outside of all deficits by skirting coordinate offense is also not real world because there's never been devolution at the size of the app. It cannot grant authority because it would contravene on the Constitution. We're not going to read a card on this because they didn't make the argument that it would be constitutional in the 1 and T, but we will in the 1AR if they make the argument it would contravene on the German Foreign Commerce Clause, which is the part that I will read. It links to politics if they're right about Congress hitting all clean energy policy because they would perceive devolving it to the state authority as the same as that policy being happening in the first place. DOE pick. Permutation to both, it shifts resources with shield link. Permutation to the counterplan clean energy policies just determine how renewables are regulated in a jurisdiction. Committee 23 clean energy policies are the frameworks that how renewable energy will be managed in a jurisdiction. If they're right, the DOE usually does clean energy policy, then the counterplan recs certainty because it involves the EPA in a process that they usually are not involved in. That recs certainty 221. The pace of hydrogen will be dependent on policies of our policy needs to provide regulatory certainty that can reduce the risk of investing in clean hydrogen. There are link evidence on the DOE trade. FDA says the EPA does not have the resources or time to invest in calculating the emissions intensity of different firm level emissions. So the counterplan cannot solve the case if it cannot enforce the mandate of the app. Command and control, trading pit. Permutation do both. Permutation the counterplan. The counterplan fails one supply. The counterplan cannot lower cost to incentivize innovation. Standard of the not enough renewable energy, green hydrogen. Capacity would involve additional investment. There isn't sufficient supplies to produce enough for green steel production. 2. Flexibility. Inflexible standards like the counterplan fails to drive deep green innovation. Every 25 minutes, standards can be complex for manufacturing. Deadline complexity to higher cost, higher flex, accessible. Standard would typically particularly take decrease of inflationary pressure. 3. Cost. Companies forced to transition to expensive technologies in the short and after market signals have to bear the burden of higher energy cost, spiking prices across the supply chain and ruining competitiveness. That's Shafi. And for instance, at least in politics, Outlaw 20 regulations used to be bipartisan, highly divided new environmental procedures are really considered time endorse GOP resist strong rollback goals. Aggressive regulatory effort increase hostility, corporate influence beholden to industry's alignment of interest with the movement to for rational activities, economic purchase and individual liberty, Trump, people the organization of environmentalism, picks are a voting issue, they steal the app and force us to debate against ourselves, which is impossible because it's impossible to have a defense of every small part of the one I see. DOE trade-off. I'm gonna. The plan is enforced by the EPA even if it must involve the DOE initially doing the plan because that's what we describe normal means as. The 1AC cross-section and does not get to explain what normal means is because they will interpret the plan in the worst way and the best way for all DS, which makes it impossible to be apt. The app could be carried out through the EPA through the Clean Air Act. It would withstand judicial review for Feldman. Tournament LCA passed implemented through CAA gives the EPA jurisdiction regulate pollution with there's reasonable application. The authority would withstand judicial review. This stands even if they win competition on the DOE pick because even if they are right that the DOE has to be involved at the outset, normal means of the plan is described as EPA enforcement, so they would not get the DOE would not get involved in the things that their evidence says hurt time and resources. Trump thumbs because he is gutting agencies across the entire federal government. There's no reason that they don't have evidence that assumes that they're understaffed now, especially for nuclear. Travis 24 DOE created during Biden to support low carbon energy may not have the staff to monitor project supports. Eventually, we need 101 more to be fully staffed. Trump makes prolif inevitable because he's declining assurances in the status quo. No prolif, even if no impact. Mueller 20. There are good reasons to avoid alarmism. Prolif has been far slower weapon to very little advantage. Prolif has taken to be substantially benign. Dozens of capable countries have considered Russell with few done so. Huge numbers have been caused in the EU, Japan. Renunciation of Dukes have reinforced procedures cases for predictions about cascades of room faulty. The world and slower leaders appreciate weapons are dangerous, costly, and rather neighbors. Weapons have been exceedingly difficult to obtain. Country was proliferated, capably combined in storage. There's never been a compelling reason to use the weapons. Politics. Permutation to both, permutation to the counterplan, and then the plan. Theoretical carbonisation is a political learner, which assumes that clean energy policy link most Republicans have proposed legislation to decarbonize steel. Because 23, opportunity for bipartisan legislation, Democrats and Republicans interest in leveraging trade policy to reward low carbon products and incentivize manufacturers of carbon emissions. CECA, Democratic led capacity, global proposal, large yard smoke from Republican cause legislation both sides. Recognize the value of climate and economic goals. The act could be carried out through the Clean Air Act, but actually skip that card. No vote switching. Edwards 16, the best of its persuasion beyond the president control and must compete with those stable factors that affect voting party, include ideology and constituencies about having president investors into the comments that made up their mind. The DA is not intrinsic because a logical policy figure could do both. Space call doesn't sell war. Global 20 states on inhibiting warfare research available to increasing wars and possible fertility mandates that avoid political verification. Not like the war will consume more than a small fraction of population space. Not make a reduce the possibility by exerting people to overview effect cost value with the unity of the people. Space might repopulate or chance of people is much lower with space settlement society. Never try or die since adaptation can solve the risk listed in there. What is evidence? And there are other mechanisms that could get us to space in the future that are independent of tax cuts. Like if it's asteroid is coming, then we would get to space maybe 100 years down the line. One pass thumped and terror swamped the impact to 0.44. Wish they could pass tax cut. The world keeps innovating trade war, bitch over over proxy voting, frozen in the chamber. Signal to discuss military pounds, SACC, legislating free dose, imperial, maybe Republicans, just as possible, difficult to make the case. Should cut spending terrorist and for effectiveness, reconciliation, certainties of terror is not going to get the same. Immediate response capital is going to wait in the silence to figure out whether it's worth investing. What's Republicans plus pen and paper, there could be multiple calls on Medicaid. Spending is not going to go away, and statutory method could be subject to a favorable ruling to force. Vote to overrule that missionary. Doge offsets any benefits from the cut. Shuffly, 25. NDT will close further departments as a part of Trump's goals to reduce the workforce, limiting this office as a chilling budget necessary as part of the nation. Trump's order marked the beginning of national reduction into force efforts. Just more space. Or I could just read prolif defense. Space call doesn't reduce extinction risk. Shozik 19. Space development does not equal to reduce risk of human extinction in short-term and long-term risk assessment will be better to protect humans under further progress with space tech will be counterbalanced by increasing anti-fragile risk even if minimum. Space tech will be achieved social, political, and economic context will directly reduce preparation. The risk and paradox and most probable threats are as Boston Market anti-fragile humans are unable to run from these risks are rooted in the way of things satellite and population dynamics. No spread or impact. Schneider 20 bomb. Stabilizing the spread to return contribute to long piece prolific is rare and robust pressures. The effect is quite small spread. Never been undertaken renewed while below weapons effort span. In years 20, 30, 39 of the dark not part open to just technological, institutional, material, intelligence has failed. Several states have undertaken nuclear reversal. I'm sending the card that I read on the DOE trade-off today. I'm understanding the cards that I read on intelligence.
Got it.
Phoenix condo, and there was one more. What was
Lopez.
It? All right. Anything else?
I don't think there was any other reasons to reject the team.
Okay. Trade pick. You've read some cards that are pretty good about trade key to lower cost. I don't think we disagreed with that. Why is low cost key to your advantages?
Well, for example, if the counterplan, lower cost is one internal link, but the more important one is that the counterplan's mandate is not flexible. So, for example, the technology that exists to decarbonize steel is not online in the status quo. So the counterplan's enforcement mechanism would fine the hell out of companies when they can't meet their obligation in the next calendar year. Trading is necessary to resolve that because in the interim, they can trade credits to meet their standard without adopting the technology that they need to develop.
So
they don't have an incentive to develop it under the counterplan because
do you
the
have
costs
a
are too high.
card? Do you have a card that's like positive incentive of offsetting the cap is a more effective incentivizer of innovation than the like stick of you don't meet the cap, gotta innovate?
Our Frontier Economics 25 evidence says that mandatory standards, i.e. the counterplan, because it is mandatory, you have to meet it no matter what.
No. That card's like it leads to higher costs. Remember, we're not disagreeing with that. I'm asking you,
No.
do you have any cards that are like positive incentives of offsetting the cap is a better incentive for innovation than the stick of mandatory?
It's not about
credits?
incentive for innovation. The counterplan might create innovation. We, again, do not agree with that premise. We think in the short run, the mandates of the counterplan would mean that companies literally cannot meet the standards set by the counterplan in the short run, which disincentivizes innovation because the government, however the counterplan is enforced, would penalize them, put lawsuits against them, find the hell out of them.
If our counterplan's cap starts at current emissions intensity, doesn't that completely get rid of that problem?
Not necessarily.
Why? It doesn't punish firms in the first year.
No, but again, there's no incentive to innovate, create technology.
The standard's going to get lower.
But as the standard gets lower, the problem aligns. If you do not allow trading to meet your obligation, then they will be punished in the interim for not decarbonizing.
Seems like we've squared the circle on this whole like low cost thing, but still we're back to square one. Why is positive incentive of offsetting the cap a better motive for innovation than high costs of non-compliance?
High cost of non-compliance, it's not that would not incentivize innovation. High cost of non-compliance would. But those high costs in the short run decimate the industry.
Okay.
But positive incentives for innovation would not.
Got it.
Pretty obviously, I think, because they would not be penalized for not doing something. They would be rewarded for doing the thing that we've said solves our advantages.
Okay, the plan excludes copper, right?
That is an accurate reading of our Pasili evidence.
You said it's what? It's an accurate reading?
Of our Pasili evidence, yeah.
Okay, but it does include steel and aluminum.
Again, it says coal and aluminum, and coal is key in steel.
Okay, that makes sense. We'll start for 10 minutes.
650. Okay, it's done. Are we ready for an order? We're waiting on that. It is the metals pick, the DOE pick.
Sorry, give me 1 second.
You're good.
Okay, metals pick. The DOE pick is like the EPA thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then advantage 3, advantage 1, advantage 2.
Metals, DOE, 1. What was the order of the advantages?
Advantage 3 is first.
Okay.
To be aligned.
Yeah.
Advantage 1, advantage 2. Oh, actually, let me take credit for the way 650. You're sure you read the fitting on the case that I'm extending, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. 645. Okay. Is anyone ready?
Not going for it, concede, perm, test of combination, conditionality, it's good, only versus undisclosed new plans, 1 flex, we need multiple options to counterbalance add-ons, huge traffic, infinite prep, Trump destroying your DAs, and 2 AR recency bias, especially justified, against an F that scratches the plan halfway through the speech, 2 quantum thinking, testing, the plan from multiple angles, teaches the F to triangulate themselves between political extremes, 3 innovation, fallbacks, encourage experimentation, because in front new arcs from candidates, hands, inspector, agent, Wednesday, cross-text voting, issue for not flowing like condo blocks, defense, having to answer condo, cancels out skew, time constraints, and the benefit requirements check, upper stickers with the counterplan, reasonability, conceded from T, and procedurals make argumentative irresponsibility, inevitable strats use good because it forces smart time allocation and critical thinking, it's inevitable because the speed and procedurals dispo links to our offense because it likes the 2A, pick the 2A already purchased process since the neg will only introduce advocacies that force a perm the DOE pick. It solves the case without tying up DOE resources, permutation do both, it links to the net benefit, view perms through offense, defense, solvency is certain, so only a risk do both, derails it, doing both, doom solvency and magnifies trade-off via turf wars, farming 15, fragmented policy implementation designs, more light separate offers, restrict area law, and effective fighting power cuts, agencies, raises challenges, coordination because agencies have different, including goals, 90 options around design, to be turf wars, producing a ramp shack, dysfunctional state makes over, inefficient and coherent degrees of legal uncertainty, contradiction, fragmentation, weakens policy making, reduce policy, excessively complex and opaque, biasing outcomes favor, release the down of risks need to navigate delegitimizing the state, specifically true in the context of overlapping energy and environmental policy, abortion 13, energy versus environmental policy should be keep energy and environmental policy independent of the use should be developed independently and the biggest inclusion of environmental elements and energy makes policy connections and inhibits policy implementation of the two intersect. They work against each other. Judge kicks the logical extension of additionality, permutation to the counterplan. It severs clean energy policy 1 tax. It's in the plan, not the counterplan. The counterplan is explicitly non-energy policy, so they get energy policy key deficits to function. The counterplan is EPA, not DOE. That's different legislation, funding, and oversight. They say certainty deficit. EPA solves the gap. Enforcement and compliance guarantee market follow-on. That's all been preferred, legally qualified, and has internal EPA expertise. It solves their internal links, specifically ACE point advantage 1. When you see Siegel is that internal, that card is agent agnostic, which should be read as solvency for the counterplan because the threshold for sufficiency is set by the 1EC. BISA point advantage 2. The phrase and evidence just says a performance standard needs to exist. CISA point advantage 3. 1EC Sutton says GASA compliance is key. Our counterplan fiats that and has an identical outcome. Independently concede 1EC cross-ex answer. I asked, do any agencies need to be involved for solvency, which the GAF said the EPA was normal means, which actually implies that our counterplan solves better than the affirmative. No takebacks. Anything else makes cross-ex not matter, and we need those moments to figure out what the GAF has more warrants empirical record of success. McCarthy 617. EPA is a cornerstone of advantage of the environmental infrastructure. The EPA has led national progress in improving air quality, cleaning up of water, pesticides, and emissions, providing for states advanced environmental health. The Clean Air Act, specifically McCarthy 17 CA, is proven one of the most successful laws ever enacted actually by the EPA to reduce carbon pollution using CA. Have clearly signaled seriousness of the U.S. commitment to addressing climate enforcement, compliance, and capacity building efforts. Element 23. EPA's climate rules include GHGs, requirements and limits on other pollutants. EPA's climate rules promise to meet full reductions in emissions, take other worst effects of climate. EPA will include climate agitation results capacity building, efforts to make them possible, transparency and accurate reporting, 123 EPA purpose of transparency and accurate reporting of emissions reductions, best available science, make roughly 17 EPA is a science agency efforts regarding the scientists for innovation and purpose, exposed to the health effects and manage risks, no certainty deficits. The DOE is responsible for agency energy policy, but our counterplan isn't an energy policy, it's an environmental policy, and it's identically solvent. The outcome is the same, which denies their evidence. Reject 2EC2. It's not about the counterplan. It doesn't say the AF is certain. It's also impossible to quantify a deficit like this, and it's certainly impossible to tie it to extinction. No card will say that. They're wrong about resource shortages. Our card on the EPA, our card on the other page says the EPA is the most likely enforcer, not the most likely enforcer of the AF, but the card doesn't say the EPA fails, only that there was more bipartisan support for the DOE. The EPA has not quit. They have enough resources. Number 26, EPA 300 employees, left numbers and cut first share of the workforce, doesn't influence enforcement. Kim 130, XM day-to-day operations, EPA follows laws, specific economies and held up, of course, any change, the agency's mission would necessitate change law. Many workers are resisting trends to have to continue to the jobs. They'll have to drag me out. Worst case scenario, the EPA would have to redirect some resources that they are currently sinking into other priorities towards enforcing the plan. That is the most charitable interpretation of this deficit. But there's not an impact to that because they didn't read an EPA trade-off TA, whereas we have an impact to doing that for the DOE. Worst case scenario, EPA workers are quitting because of climate inaction. The counterplan reverses that. Leverage takes employees face that painful decision. Quitter. We're going to have this road plane attempt to roll back environmental protections. Picks bad, counter-interrupt, the net gets non-topical, federal agent picks that don't compete on USFG, ACE point, germane ground, non-energy counterplans, or the core generic. The AF always has an energy policy key as a deficit, and DOB good arguments. Non-energy picks are uniquely good because we voted for an energy topic for 24, energy topic paper, BISA point, education, comparative agency analysis, a key to education specific to our mechanism, allowing aid to stimulate energy for environmental policy. Only a few studies that systematically examined versus specific areas of environmental policy, examining specific policy areas enables more nuance than they begin for broader studies. CESA point, they eliminate all counterplans. Every advantage counterplan would use a different agent and mechanism. This is no different. CESA point, deficits are easy. Defend the DOE, say energy policy is key, or the EPA is bad. Just because the 2EC dropped the ball doesn't mean we should lose. E, theories and escape hatch that trades off with substance conceded. 5, or F, reject org, not the team. Stick them to the 2EC, otherwise late breaking debates, gut clash. Advantage 3. Okay, this might just be the sleep deprivation talking. I'm pretty sure they dropped an impact turret. Backsliding on development causes extinction. It turns fragile states into incubators of disease and terrorism and prevents inclusive global governance over existential issues. That's wrong. Our evidence lists several threats by name and literally says that they cause extinction. I have no idea what the 2AC thinks they said to this turn. The 1AC tag explicitly said they cause friendshoring. That means our entire supply chain gets concentrated in Europe, which guts developing economies. There's no new answers, no comeback. I'm not even going to read additional cards on this because none of these things are justified. Our 1NC card does have a terminal to all of these things. So if I later say anything about laundry list impacts being bad, that's not applicable because our card does say extinction. This is an impact turn to the AF. It turns warming because it means that they don't have enough resources to get off the ground, and also means other countries don't adopt the AF's CCS mechanism. It turns Chinese aggression because it causes the global south to align with China and undermines our ability to deter them by stacking the deck for China and international support. Now, okay, Greenland thumps. Europe is furious at Trump's expansionist rhetoric, and he deliberately isn't ruling out force. That's Doyle. Trade is insufficient. None of their... Actually, you know what? Scratch that. Scratch that thumper. I'm going the impactor. It's devastating. Okay. Democracy, no democracy laundry list. Liberal states are no better at solving global problems because they're prone to gridlock, rent-seeking, and political dysfunction. Autocracies are more agile and responsive. RF surveys every issue, pollution, biodiversity, finance, terrorism, and concludes that democracies are not better. This is also proven by Trump in China, which was America was incapable of tamping down on a global pandemic. China had far harsher and more stringent lockdowns. Alignment does not solve extinction. Our card has a terminal, but their card does not. I've already explained why those things don't cause extinction. Alignment with other countries like China, Russia, other great powers, etc. is just as important. The US and EU can't solve all problems single-handedly because that would just freeze out other great powers. It also link turns there. That also answers their public goods arguments. China are not better at those. Is not better at providing those. Okay, China defense will also be on the other page. Advantage 1. No Chinese adventurism. The PLA isn't preparing to pick fights. It lacks trained commanders and staff, planning or preparation for war with the US, and speeches cultivating support for war. Prefer it post-dates every 1EC impact card. You should punish the 2EC for just rereading impact overviews and not answering our warrants. Our evidence does assume a lack of manufacturing, but that doesn't really matter because China will be incapable of winning a war. Their Johnson evidence is reverse qualified. They omitted author calls. He's a VP for Northrop Grumman, not exactly qualified. Now, there's no China leadership impact. They have an incentive for regional stability because provoking war
war would jeopardize their economy, which is the bedrock of legitimacy. PLA elites also recognize the limits of their own power and benefit from cooperating, not ousting America. That tweets that 2EC was emboldens expansionism, which they are not prepared for. Our evidence says that China provides public goods. A good example of this is COVID masks, in which China spread its resources around the globe, but the United States did not, which did not solve public goods. Readiness does not solve extinction when it fails. America's military was thwarted by some of the poorest countries in the Middle East, and we couldn't durably defeat the Taliban. We certainly can't defeat a pure adversary in their backyard. Two allies solve their impacts. Ukraine proves conquest is hard, and H2AD is cheap and easy. That's our Machiavellian evidence. Regardless of whether readiness solves extinction in the abstract, our evidence indicates force projection fails. The 2EC did not answer that argument, and they've conceded that they did not have leadership impact, and they did not credibly extend that in the 2EC. Advantage 2. The AF is a drop in the ocean of emissions. Every other sector like ag, the grid, etc., swamp the AF, and other emitters like China and India, CCS and hydrogen are an argument. The steel sector adopting them doesn't magically mean every other sector decarbonizes, because they'll have no incentive to spend the money on it. The plan doesn't solve globally because people who just trade carbon-intensive steel with each other. They have also not read a spillover card. The Jorgen's evidence is 3% max when it's Jorgen's 22. And carbon solve would 3% of the global carbon budget. Super adaptation solves the impact. The numbers don't lie. Deaths and damage from disastrous heat and malnutrition have plummeted despite plenty of warming. Interventions like drought-resistant crops, infrastructure adaptations, and AC are spreading rapidly. And concussion temperature extremes, that's Brown, prefer an analysis of existing data to Callahan et al.'s conjecture. Yes, adaptation, it is not too complex. Our evidence says that existing data solves all of their wants, and it also solves their food supply stuff, because we can scale up nitrogen, scale up fertilizer, or create drought-resistant crops.
Can you quickly, hold on, 6:45, and you just say, I'm going to teach that to you. Oh, maybe like a quick answers. Do you think about that? And if not, okay. 6:31.
Okay, are you good for cross-sections?
Yep.
What's the definition of energy policy that you read? Was it in the 1C?
Yeah.
Where does it say that it must be the DOE?
I think this is like, I don't know, like, respectfully, like a toddler's understanding of topicality. So, any definition intends to exclude by omitting other things. So,
No,
like,
okay, no,
but
I don't even think your evidence makes the claim that energy policy must include the DOE.
It does.
No, it doesn't.
Lowry says, I use range of methods.
To assess funding, I use budget authority for the Department of Energy. That is the one line in this piece of evidence that mentions the Department of Energy. Why does that mean that energy policy has to include the DOE?
It's an analysis of environmental and energy policy.
Yes.
The way that it categorizes in that study, energy policy, is studying the Department of Energy.
No, it's
so yes, it
one
directly
header.
substantiates
One
this
header in this long article says that the funding mechanisms for energy policy has been from the Department of Energy. Why does that mean that the plan has to be the Department of Energy enforcement?
I think
which is what you're linked to the DA.
I think you're over-focusing on this one line, because the introduction to this scholar's use of DOE funding authority is that they are disentangling energy policy from
I get that it is
environmental policy.
distinct from environmental policy, but I don't understand why your evidence makes that agent distinction.
I've already explained the argument.
Okay, is there a functional difference between what the EPA would do in the world of the counterplan and what the DOE would do in the world of the plan? Like, you've just said that they're functionally distinct based on agent. Does it that the counterplan also does not apply to energy-related emissions?
It's not that. So there are functional differences. There might be different authorizing legislation.
No. I'm asking
there
about
would be different funding streams.
No. I'm asking about the end result of the enforcement.
They
that the
answer to
agency
different
does in the
committees.
plan.
Don't conflate the end result with competition.
No,
If
I'm
you
not.
wanna
I'm
answer
not
that-
asking about competition. I'm asking about solvency. I'm wondering if the parts of the supply chain and the parts of the steel sector that the counterplan inevitably applies to is the same as the plan.
The parts of
Okay, how can they apply it to energy-related emissions if you're right that that is energy policy and that's not the EPA statutory authority?
The EPA can regulate energy,
Okay, then,
but that's an
then what
environmental
is your
policy
competition argument?
because it's the Environmental Protection Agency.
This seems so semantic. I don't understand why your evidence makes that distinction, and I don't think you've read a single card that the EPA can statutorily regulate energy-related emissions.
We did.
Or that contravenes
The one
your
in C
competition
solvency
argument.
card says it.
Your 1NC solvency argument says that they can use climate rules to reduce emissions, but it doesn't say they can apply those things to the energy production of steel.
Okay, so if you would like a historical example of like the EPA regulating like energy, I mean the Clean Power Plan was promulgated under the EPA.
Then why does that
for
not
example.
disprove your competition argument?
Because it wasn't an energy policy. It was so the question of whether something is an energy policy is not just does it affect energy, and conflating those things would give the policy, would vacate all meaning from the policy, or for the term, sorry.
Okay, it's the warming advantage, the Lopez counterplan, the metals pick, politics, and DOE trade-off. Yes, so warming advantage, the Lopez counterplan, metals pick, politics, trade-off. Okay, Michigan, good.
Yes.
John, sorry.
Sorry, 1 second.
631. I'm sorry. I love you. I think I forgot to say I'm kicking the other counterplans legitimacy.
That's why I'm kicking it, right?
Great. 625.
Okay, warming, Lopez, metals, politics, trade-off.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right. Anybody not good? Okay.
There is zero evidence of extreme increased weather. The IPCC agrees that flooding, droughts, and fire are increasing in the random noise of natural availability drowns out human influence. That's ground drop. The epistemology index studies that attribute extreme events to human emissions are overwhelmingly advised by activist intent. The publication bias against no results, no climate war, shared environmental stress, catalyzed cooperation, and demand management. 2,500 years of history finds not a single scarcity-induced war. Their claim is counterintuitive since war destroys the resources states fighting for access to, which is their water evidence. The confluence of all these existential risks is not a warrant because they need to win independent determined links to each of these things to, well, when they occur in the first place. Lopez can see the permutation we're not going for. Lopez being illegitimate is a reason to reject the argument not the team because the punishment fits a crime, cross-line reasonability from the conditionality page. Same with the metals pick and see the permutation. The pick's argument was answered on the DOE counterplan. The politics, yeah, you can see the space war doesn't solve existential risk, but also this adaptation argument because it explicitly takes out the reason that warming would lead to extinction. DOE, DA. Prolif outweighs everything one is magnitude. It estimates existing flashpoints, grids, it doesn't do ones, it takes only one accident, a trigger figure to entomb the entire planet to its time frame. There are 40 states in the cusp of nuclear club of random action makes them escalation, quick turns, case, competitive economy, Chinese nuclear exports, facilities, military modernization, 419, Chinese nuclear industries, vehicle for advancing military modernization, through diversification, adaptation, forward, nuclear technology, basing, simply 6 years, nuclear technology, SPGs for military programs, MCI for focus on nuclear tech for naval propulsion, for self-supported vehicles, heroes, and aspects, naval propulsion, support, naval defense, global military presence. This makes us marquee for technical acquisition, and indicating the transition in these areas can be turned into basic Chinese military programs, be warming only, nuclear power source agreement 20, nuclear already assassinated fighting against climate change, only effective demonstrated reliable carbon-free engines that will existing happen to find time before get actually damage success is not possible without robust nuclear not to pursue this is to pursue war becoming irreversible no matter what. C, trade allied prolif destroys because it causes war between all of our major trading partners. C, or D, digital authoritarianism, nuclear energy, skin digital dominance, for L, 25 companies who move to particularly maintain U.S. tech leadership and defense on clean for power that is environmentally available 24/7 hours for the center of security. The link debate, the plan redirects DOE towards mission intensity tracking. That's a resource-intensive task that consumes finite leadership attention and industrial resources at the expense of current mandates, which is the Smith evidence. It certainly trades off with commercial scale demonstration of advanced nuclear reactors, which is a conceded one-C claim because it is mission-critical projects. I'm going to read a bunch of cards that answer all of this quibbling and cross-ex. They say that this is an argument for the DOE pick. We are not the DOE severs clean energy policy. One, text, it's in the plan, not the kind of one. The kind of was explicitly not energy policy, which means that they get to clean energy deficits to its function, which was explained in the 2NC policy consultation. Energy policies are exclusively the DOE. Here's their argument about how they are solely energy that was explained in cross-ex. Solana 24. The DOE acts established directed department of energy coordinating energy policy, lending consolidating energy policy jurisdiction using the rather than across departments. B, statutory authority. The kind of use of the EPA means it's drowning environmental policies like the CA, COS 1 and 13. Communication position onto the federal level. The EPA is applying the CA to emissions. CPA groups are working hard to address problems posed by energy sector. Nonetheless, EPA so authority establish energy policy. The DOE and the EPA are distinct departments. That makes the kind of one definitely not energy policy. Following 17, we find energy policy, national energy planning policy that affect energy policy not found. For example, like actions of CA impact energy, but are not energy policy. They are functionally different on the basis of statutory regulatory authority. Federalism and congressional oversight for 17 the two federal agencies responsible for energy environmental reflect the long-term divide statutes from when these agencies draw legal authorities to assign them different tasks and body different approaches and engage in separate committees disclosing the agency runs the staff and surrounding the flexible ability to distribute missions if their context within the state and their lane not get out of it in matters beyond the jurisdiction. They're enforced by different agencies governed by distinct statutes and subject to different review processes for 17 energy environmental regulation governed by different federal statutes uploaded by separate agencies structured officially for the distribution CB initiatives are not subject to the OMB environmental regulation falls in the constitution of the EPA conform statute by contract adopt different approach to federal environmental statute prevention for prevention states may see but not follow states before watching the work instead of federal pollution those equivalent of the Federal Power Act C legislation EPA policies are non-energy not to maintain bills to rest routine. Section 1392 NGA directs the DOE to adopt energy codes, create a grant program, expand industrial materials, strengthen DOE's clean energy, non-energy amendments, if energy codes amendments are not germane to the subject. Debated amendments filed include environmental regulation of the non-energy concerns, non-management involved the change to EPA regulations. D. Prima facie bright line will say this not an opportunity cost because the outcome on energy is similar. That moves the distinction. It means that any action ever could be an energy policy as long as its influence on energy supply or demand. E. Intent to define. Here's Crossix answer. Angle 24. The U.S. energy policy measured by the DOE. They say that there is no reason that they would lead to a trade-off. There is a key part of the plan, the topicality required to be enforced by the DOE. If the office energy policy has to involve the DOE's advanced labs that measure emissions intensity but are putting jobs at the side to focus on advanced nuclear. They say that we do not get to determine normal means. Yes, and that gets to explain what it is. One, interpret our argument as topicality, not interpretation of normal means. Reject plan in vacuum. One, moral hazard to force us to beat T to win the case, which is the issue that means on top of glass, always so much reading the resolution. Counter-interpretation, cross-ex, and tag term scope of the plan. Solves our office business only their words as well as what they put in the plan themselves. Two, it's the only way to preserve net ground on this topic because Trump means we are all forced to rely upon any means necessary to disprove the because Trump took his legislation to all of our TAs. They say that the EPA can enforce the gap through the CEA. That is our argument, which was demonstrated by 2NC solvency evidence. DOE national labs have to get involved as well, which answers this business about the DOE not getting involved because they're right about EPA enforcement. Trump thumbs is not true. Trump's DOE is locked on nuclear now, right? The energy sector has promised to fix everything wrong. Biden era DOE commercialization of nukes. Trump's DOE will abolish nuclear war 25. Trump's DOE abolish nuclear. Trump will come against Russian, Chinese, nuclear exports, which may demand including next generation technology. Trump is separate nuclear exporters' rights served to the board of advancing nuclear company. In the Octal evidence, the Biden thumper is ridiculous. They were sufficiently staffed to make current energy now. Brown is in 23 staff to the channel of the DOE, including experts, 25 experts. Overall, the DOE's majestic markets for sound implementation of robotic programs, six the clean energy transition. Trump is a reset Brad Stock 215. Trump's first term as well as decision made just as Trump might. The nuclear might thrive under Trump. Trump is an axing advanced nuclear also 321. Trump requests DOE set a list of subjects to eliminate a drafted in the works that list. Advanced nuclear doesn't appear to have been targeted firearms weren't in the national labs, weren't nuclear power, and were not reversed overnight. Helper 32 works to maintain America's nuclear weapons were very hard about face calls from lawmakers and reads rapid receipt of most of the nuclear engineers through the 50 were dismissed both were administrative for reciprocal roles contractors to handle most day-to-day operations of the labs and the nuclear labs are exempt from cuts being reversed immediately. In 24 hours, Trump does not make proof of inevitable 24. Oval Office does not give out all foreign policy Congress holds the pursuit to the influence of foreign policy Congress and national licenses to discuss march of NDAs, including World War II, Korea Congress best after second Trump strikes. The prolific impact it certainly goes nuclear and spreads. Each new nuclear state multiplies the risk, preemption, internal instability, eventual aggression, balance in 20. New nuclear competition in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, may prove unstable, small arsenals can handle global great powers may be galvanized and passion country programs for fruition, many nuclear countries close forcing light reaction, retail capabilities may be weak, attempt to predation, nuclear combat accidents, clumps and coups, or people nuclear levels, giving states more aggressive, nuclear forcing cancel each other out, leaving free to engage in conventional warfare. Each new armed state could add to the chains of apocalypse and tangle conventional shootout accidents, high risks in 25. Nuclear odds are more likely to take nuclear odds can use residue to strategies to conflict during the global Pakistan, South Africa, and catalyst posture which ought to catalyze intervention. Nuclear odds may be more blunt to pick fights, nuclear odds may be less inclined to make interventions with conventional defense, nuclear levels substitutes we see weak conventional defense can increase risk of terrorist failure. Nuclear use can be delivered by acts in more states acquire these becomes more likely to be in cascade.
Cut it, cascade. That's high risks.
Okay, we have 8 spots.
I've never heard this before.
with spreads.
Yeah. That's fine.
I have kind of a resident voice, so it's like saying next door, it's like, oh, it's terrible.
The order is the
You may have to speak up.
warming advantage, industry advantage, the alignment advantage, the pick that had a spec condo thing, the DOE pick, and then the DOE DA.
Very cool, one more time.
Warming advantage, industry advantage, the advantage with the term like alignment,
Yep.
then the condo pick thing, then the DOE pick, and then the DOE DA.
Sorry, my account was there. Not there. Very cool. Okay, right.
Yeah. Everyone have to-
I'm loaded for me, so.
Okay. There's one more. Okay. Warming causes extinction. 2 points are invisible, rest are non-linear, environmental collapse quickly cascades over only humans' ability to adapt, which drives disease, but every loss of food, what's that spread, it turns every single impact they've gone for. It collapses nuclear deterrence, creating water scarcity. Migration crisis that Macintosh obviously turns prolific because in a world where the US and NATO cannot access nuclear deterrence, then allies are more secured and they will proliferate faster. The combination of all of it makes it unsustainable and overwhelms every single piece of defense they have. Air, app, humanity is one chance, the environment is one thing you cannot negotiate with. We can obviously try to convince South Korea, Japan, etc. not to proliferate, but you cannot tell the environment to stop warming. Their court saying obviously incorrect is our argument. Spratt is assumptive of that because he excludes crucial tipping points. Error on the side of scientific consensus. Only we have back authority from every relevant scientific agency. Official turns relevant makes every ally more insecure, which is stated above. Yes, spillover. Urban sense that steals an input to every sector, lowers the cost for other critical climate technology. Yes, global solvency uses a massive market. Our evidence is that it forces global combines to lower emissions intensity. Only going for warming causes war. Adaptation fails. It's too politically contentious and complex, and no country would ever pass aggressive adaptation policies. Yes, sea level rise, warming increases melting, which floods U.S. nuclear bases. Yes, climate wars, resource scarcity induces lash out for more resources, but they have not answered that it floods nuclear bases, which makes war inevitable, which obviously means that we turn the DA, but the DA cannot turn the case. Advantage. The industry can see defense, we're not going for it. No cross applications. Alignment, U.S. alignment is an impact filter, is the foundation. A multilateral governance involves trade, terror, climate impact policy for Africa, Middle East, and Central Asia. Independently digital governance, also extinction, insurance, state regulation, AI, preventing disinfos, cybercrime, exposure that causes digital cold war, authoritarianism, states cause extinction, they're more prone and ecological response. For WND's pandemic, climate, terror, AI, biotech, space, that's battlefield. It does solve. Authoritarians constantly capture and inhibit dispersal of social goods. They're less cooperative. For evidence is more newer and assumptive and actually reverse causal, while theirs is not. Now, the turn proper. This is not drop. The tweets did not reach impact defense because this is offense. They've totally misread the scenario of what the plan is intended to do. We said reshoring is good in the context of greening supply for our allies, which would be net better for developing nation. It is not a middle finger to developing economies, which is what their evidence is assumptive of. The plan would, yes, reduce trade in the short term, but also boost development long term because those developing nations need clean processing to continue exports of critical minerals to not just the U.S., but every relevant adversary and trading partner. We solve every terminal to the impact, which is why we did not read defense. This is not a strategic concession, but rather offense for us. Quote, pandemics, terror, and broadly existential risk is the only thing that the weighing evidence says. It's better checked by democracy broadly. It's both specific EU-US alignment that is the basis for all multilateral governance, which means I'm inserting also every relevant line from Sutton and the Bradford evidence that demonstrates how it is not actually excluding the developing economies. It's just about China and Russia and reshoring generically, which you should not extrapolate to be anything else. The pick. No aspect, we clarified a cross-examination that's sufficient. Anything else is unpredictable and infinitely aggressive, reasonability, counterinterpretation. We only have to specify as far as the resolution, but this is obviously not offense the pick proper. The program to the counterplan. Clean energy policies are agent agnostic. That's Kaminsky evidence. The block has no debatability defense of their interpretation. The DOE pick is impossible to answer. It's script all night grounds to get always of the EPA. Do the plan regardless of the app actually is the DOE, which is a trade-off DA or politics DA by the DOE, i.e. this debate. There is no app recourse since they are correct that the EPA has a statutory authority to do the large swath of energy policy production. And the block did not say predictability was reason for the definition, so do not let them say it in the 2 and R. That no picks bad cross apps should have been said in the form to the counterplan of 2 and C. Germain ground does not apply. We've said it is so much worse for apps. No education standard. It's inevitable regardless of which competition arc they use, but their model is worse than just one to win every debate. There is no not links the DA since it proves that we were the EPA all along. It also answers everyone in our card about the EU doing energy policy. So evidence just says it's the way that renewable energy is managed and regulated in certain jurisdictions, which is agent and not agnostic. We only need to win and disprove functional competition since textual competition is bad and not real world. Eventually strike all their definitions. Define energy policy and not CEP, which is not a term of art of the resolution. So you should aft. The counterpoint also cannot solve. The evidence says that EPA does not have the relevant data for sourcing emissions and calculating emissions density of imports. Our evidence says that it is key since absent knowing emissions density, you cannot accurately price the carbon to solve warming and competitiveness. This also answers every single deficit card that they think applies. They have not read one specific, the steel industry or low carbon intensity as a standard, so they do not have cards that say they can price imports either, which means that any risk of link defense or impact defense means that the case obviously outweighs DOE. At the top, there's no terms case. Nuclear cannot solve warming. LL21. Nuclear would avoid it was 2% nuclear cannot expand extension across your name. Mine at the overlap limited atmosphere reactors. Let me look before 2050. Even assuming source scenario is feasible, even somebody almost relief for the emissions in 2040. Nuclear is too slow. Some anti-construction reactors take 17 years longer than solar wind. And reactors started in 2018. Took it down 8 years. Nuclear effects is slower, not effective. And therefore, to battle climate emergencies, counterproductive funds are not available for more effective options. Does not turn trade. Our evidence identifies EU-US alignment over its gases specifically as internal links, so they do not overcome that. It also does not turn digital governance because no one said that nuclear overwhelms AI, and their evidence does not assume so. Now, the no of defense, the fast evidence is wrong. It does not say yes capability. It says that if cascades occurred, then it would get worse. But our argument is that there is no cascade in the first place because no one has the capabilities to do so. Did not answer the 2AC Schneider evidence that was sent out after. It's no spread in the first place. Schneider says that spread has never occurred empirically in 29 out of the 39 states that have specifically chosen not to because they lack the technological, institutional, and managerial capacity to use that spread is factually impossible. They have not explained what states, no scenario, no specification for who actually would react in the first place. So obviously, error app on specificity. Even if emissions are triggered, there's no impact. Schneider 19 spread has said that merely emission states desire into reality, saying many years will have continued the process of 29 out of the 39. The work on recorded are no way to detect and show many nations built in several states, particularly nuclear versus abandoning activities developing nuclear exploitative and no cascade doubling 18 nuclear theory, the latest turn against several decades of forecast burst and fall down most previously wants very prolonged cause. Domino behavior, there's no strike deal, nuclear agents, no belly up, the chain reaction of recurring because of the nuclear strike and the other like system analysis just happens to identify whether they pursue no arsenal, no regional dominance or adventures and Mueller's 20 alarm circuit, the nuclear country would use the nuke to dominate the area of our topic. About half all the countries more likely that we're sustainable make demands out with other standard of intimidation. Now, they are wrong about the link. If they are quote mission critical, it would not be redirected. One AC says emission is simple and not burdensome. There's a 3-step process and existing mechanisms now demonstrate feasibility. Emission intensity is insufficient. The Fishman evidence is about determination of intention intensity, which the plan already cites in its status quo. Winning competition counterpoint demonstrates no link, but Smith is about generic reorganization of DOE priorities. The diverse time and focus, it does not establish a link to emissions intensity. You should not read the two in conjunction because their argument is totally descriptive of two different things. Their card is also pre-Doge. That certainly thumbs in insert for reference about lost productivity because the Trump has fired people. Now, Doge thumbs. Doge out all of the evidence our evidence post states in assumption more cuts coming. British for energy. Identified thousands of stamps and non-essential 800 tries to NSA various circumstance with same nuclear stockpile. Doge thumbs to Hotel 3-5. Doge next 70% to 2,000 employees including ship defense. Nuclear safety authority of all safety. The some evidence just said that Trump requested projects to be eliminated. Our evidence post states says that he is planning on cutting NSA and he won't listen to the recommendations anyway. Halper says that most were exempt for the first round but not predicted about the future. So Trump thumbs in the future.
625.
625.
Okay. Good for order.
Yeah.
It's going to be advantage 3. The D we pick. The trade-off DA. Advantage 2. Okay, we're good.
Development outweighs its the only impact of zero defense, shattering progress toward economic goals makes the entire planet more prone to all existential risks, terrorism, disease, AI, nuclear war, all listed by name, flagged as existential, and dropped in the 2EC. This debate ended when they functionally dropped an impact turn. If you're okay with a basically brand new 1AR, you are not qualified to judge. Another debate outweighs on magnitude. Cumulative existential risk from a failure to lock in economic resilience outweighs any single scenario. Controls the case, dropped all warrants for turns case. The F can't go for try or die or case outweighs because they make all of their impacts worse, not better. It turns, they have dropped the reason for why it turns warming. The F's internal link to solving it is global adoption of CCS and low carbon technology. Reversing development makes states too poor to take up that expensive technology and make the upfront costs necessary for it to diffuse internationally and deploy it at scale. The 2AR gets nothing and cannot go for this advantage. It outweighs alignment. The ceiling for F impacts is only America and Europe. Developing states are more plentiful, they are more dispersed, so they have a greater influence on the trajectory of existential risk. They are the battleground between the US and China, so they are more likely to vector existential risk from great power war. Importantly, winning this turn means alignment can't solve any impact. The US and EU might cooperate post-plan, but the most generous reading of that is that they attempt to solve problems, but are incapable of because the entire world is collapsing around them as a result of the US yanking our infrastructure and supply chains out of developing economies. I only have to 99% the case, and then the debate just ends. Alignment doesn't solve extinction. Our internal link outweighs, which is dropped. The difference is that our card says existential risk and theirs does not. Winning Europe solves a handful of problems is like a nice FYI, but only our impacts are flagged as explicitly existential. I'm also going to cross-apply the democracies fail evidence from the 1NC and explain it more below. Winning democracies are actually worse at solving global problems. It means that it is totally futile to cooperate between them. The most fruitful partnership imaginable will be between the US and autocracies and the global south, not between the US and another democracy, because that will just mean two parties that are incapable of solving global problems are banding together, but there is still a ceiling on that and it cannot solve extinction. Now, I will do that here. This answers the next thing about digital governance. The F cannot, we have linked terms digital governance. The F permanently freezes the global south out of all cooperation. They don't have a reason why the F facilitates it. They've dropped that there are alt causes to digital governance, like collaborating with the US or China, which are all more important players in the global sphere. Their evidence also does not say extinction. There's no reason why the F solves any of that, and regardless, winning the development turn ensures the inevitability of all offense, so try or die flips neg. Now, democracy kinda sucks, which internal link turns digital governance. Checks and balances hold back flexible governance and tie the hands of leaders. That is our Paolo evidence. They've dropped the Trump COVID example, which walls out a 2AR on democracy good, on which a democracy had a totally shambolic response to COVID. By contrast, China smothered the outbreak domestically and actively spread public goods, which internally turns their crises argument. Again, the 1AR just restated their internals without answering their warrants, which they explicitly dropped. You should punish them for doing. Capture is their only warrant. They dropped. Democracies are equally prone to that because of lobbying and campaign donations and special interests. Populist politicians do not act in the best interest of their overall constituencies. And again, I don't know what capture means. If it's just special interests have control over the government, democracies are equally susceptible to that because they can use money to influence elections. Also, the public is not especially smart, so they do not reward leaders for solving global risks. They say no link. 1. The 2EC didn't say this, strike it. 2. Yes impact, or yes link. 1EC Sutton evidence says the plan, quote, mainsprings US-EU friendshoring. Our 1NC link to this could not be more clear. Friendshoring means concentrating supply chains in Europe. That is what friendshoring means. It means concentrating industry between the US and another ally. It doesn't boost development. No card says that the AF causes that, so the risk of the link certainly outweighs. They have no answer to our claim that when friendshoring means that you are trading mostly with an ally that is an equivalent degree of development with you, but that is not, so friendshoring means redistributing supply chains. And again, our evidence is a link to friendshoring, and the AF said that they caused that. We get to concede that. Otherwise, there's no cost to making shitty arguments. The logical implication of introducing a thing is that your opponents get to concede it. They say they boost development. Again, no card says it. This is just an assertion. I've link turned their democracy argument above. The AF cannot insert rehalidings because that adds speech time. Their card doesn't say anything about developing nations. It says improving cooperation and economic growth in general, but our evidence says that will come at the expense of developing nations. The best case scenario for them is that economic resources, is that developing economies don't crash, but that their economic resources are redistributed to Europe. The problem with that is that it also means that development happens way, way slower, which increases the likelihood of existential risk. Do we pick not going for it, perm testing competition, trade-off TA, not going for it, there is no impact to Perliff, which takes out their return skates warrants. Advantage 2. The 1AR is good on terminal impact. They somehow forgot to answer that warming is not anthropogenic. Human emissions are swamped by natural variability and random noise that drowns out human impacts on extreme weather and produce 1AR impacts about flooding nuclear bases. Drop the epistemology, indict somehow twice. AF authors are biased by activist intent to get published. That's Brown, who is a PhD from Duke climatologist. Their authors were all fear-mongering. Tech over truth. This is a technical concession that shapes AF internal links. Not voting on this argument is akin to blatant interventionism that breaks debate. It does disprove their warming wars internal, since those are overhyped by junior-level researchers. No offense. With zero data, over 2,500 years of history shows war is less likely under conditions of resource stress. The 1AR lacked any warrant why military bases getting flooded would cause the US to just arbitrarily start a war. That makes no sense since their capabilities were already be destroyed and they would be forced into a cooperating position. Combination of all risks is epistemic malice. If we win defense to individual internal links, or if it defense does assume the combination, super adaptation solves. Strapped again, humanity is resource rich, can invent drought-resistant crops, and warming is super slow over millennia, which means we are not sitting ducks to emergent resource from food, water, any other military facility. The 1AR has no scenario for extinction. It gets hot does not mean 8 billion people die. Last thing, the AF does not solve global warming because other sectors solve it. The AF might solve other countries, but steel is like a tiny fraction of emissions, and there's still no other incentive for other sectors to adopt CCS.
150. One. Advantage 2, advantage 3. Okay, is sorry. Are people good? Warming causes extinction. I'm only going for war because the two and lack comprehensive defense with. There are two internal links with that. They do not have defense. One is nuclear deterrence. Sea level rise devastate the credibility of our nuclear deterrent, forcing adversarial aggression. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, they agree are all accidental and cause wars. If the U.S. sea level, if all of our U.S. bases flooded because of sea level rise as a result of warming, then the nuclear deterrent would not be credible because they know that we are not able to launch on warning which causes nuclear aggression because they know that we are not able to counter them in those spheres of in their spheres of influence. Second is resource scarcity. Induced conflicts are bad. There's no cooperation war because they cannot cooperate when there's literally no resources able to cooperate over it. It hurts interdependence between countries because there's no more trade between countries, which causes escalation and aggression. That's right. Evidence explicitly says it goes nuclear, which answers all of their warrants. We both agree that nuclear war causes extinction. The only question is whether or not ET has a better internal link to it. We obviously do not. Anthropogenic was not in the block. It didn't catch warrant for it in the block. The 2NR didn't have a warrant. Didn't extend a piece of evidence by name. So you cannot vote on this. Our evidence says that it is caused by humans, and there are tipping points that are causing it out, and caused by human-induced emissions. Even so, even if it's not anthropogenic, the plan reduces anthropogenic emissions, which is sufficient to keep us under tipping points. All of our evidence says that tipping points are the key internal link. There are carbon bombs that we are going to pass in the status quo. Our permafrost and Amazon emissions, which we are sufficient to keep us under because of the solvency stuff that I will extend about. The epistemology in that is wrong. We did answer it in the block. We said that their evidence is about environmental claims about warming, which we are not going for an impact to. We are not saying that warming hurts the environment, causes food shocks, or causes environmental collapse, biodiversity, acidification, any of that. We are saying that warming increases the likelihood of conflict because it hurts the credibility of our nuclear deterrent, and it causes scarcity-based conflict. There also our only word is that it's about junior level researchers. I want to see war impact cards are both from PhD level researchers who are the highest level of qualification. So there's no epistemology in it to those specific claims. Yes, warrant for war. Our evidence says that the nuclear deterrent is not credible when sea level rise hurts the ability for us to have launch and warning capabilities, which means that there's no defense to that specific claim. There's no capability to destroy the argument for resource wars. Our evidence says that capabilities would stay intact, which means that there would be incentive for escalation, but aggression is more likely in a world where there are no resources because it hurts interdependence between countries and it fractures the ability for countries to stay cooperating with each other. There's no adaptation. We provide a 1AC piece of evidence that is from 2025, is more recent than all of our evidence, and it says 3 warrants for why the adaptation fails. One is political tensions. There's a first mover disadvantage for adapting to climate change because the country or the municipality that implements it first would be worse off because it increased costs for local businesses, which they do not want to do. Second is it's complex. What methods do you adopt? What adaptation do you do? How do you adapt to the fact that sea level rise is going to destroy the credibility of the nuclear deterrent? This is in the context of the environmental impacts of climate change, but not in the context of the wars that we've said will happen as a result of climate change. Third, it's costly. It costs the only internal link for local leaders to implement adaptation measures. They have no evidence that says that it would be cost efficient or that there is political will to do it. So adaptation is totally zero. Adding the word super before your argument does not make it true. It's not that we're going for that warming makes the world to be too hot, which causes wars. We're going for specifically that it increases sea level rise and it causes nuclear war, which is a scenario that they have not contested. We do solve other sections. They drop both the 1AC internal link cards that say that the 1AC steel is A sufficient because it lowers the cost for carbon critical technology like hydrogen and CCS across the board, which allows for economy-wide rollout that solves. But also steel is a critical input to every other sector. Transportation, industry, manufacturing, and energy all rely on steel as an input. So decarbonizing steel spills over to decarbonize other sectors. Warming might not be big, but it's definitely bigger than the deterrent because we are winning that the deterrent is an add-on for us and not offense for them. Go there now. I'll answer the impact at the top. It is totally incoherent. Even if you somehow conclude we lose the deterrent, explain what the distinction between their evidence and ours is. The 2NR is a lot of our evidence says the word existential. So does ours because both teams agreed that nuclear war was existential from the 1AC. But even if it doesn't say extinction verbatim, their impacts are terror, disease, AI, nuclear war. We access that because even if this wasn't explicitly in the 2AC, we do access those impacts. Though all of the evidence that all the things in their laundry list were named by name in the 2AC as reasons that EU-US cooperation solves and reasons that democracy solves. We do access those impacts, and it was not new in the 1A because the 2AC said RF accesses those impacts, and it was an implicit extension and an explicit extension of 1AC evidence. That is totally illogical, but their wrong evidence does not say the latter, terror, disease, AI, nuclear war. So we access theirs better than the term. It just says terror and disease. Explain how any of that causes total extinction. It is tried AF because everyone has agreed that those things are coming in the status quo, and only voting AF can avert it since we have a better internal link to it that will be explained below. Not brand new in the 1A. The 2AC did say no link because we said that US-EU cooperation is the critical internal link to checking those impacts, which answers the implicit claim that US-EU internal cooperation crowds out developing nations. It is tried AF because the implication is that if we solve the turn is that there's no link. This is debate 101, and Kansas is reading add-ons for us. There's no turns case. None of it was fleshed out. Developing countries necessary for solving warming is our internal link because we've read 1AC solvency evidence that says that the AF correlates global compliance with the AF standard, which they haven't contested the solvency of. Just because they said turns case does not mean they contested the solvency of the 1AC. They need to win that turns case outweighs the solvency of the 1AC, which is explained in depth on the warming advantage, and they do not have a turn that outweighs our solvency to the case. Turns case cannot mitigate tri-die because everyone agrees that warming is coming in the status quo, and the AF is the only
only way to solve it, so they don't have they don't have a way to access that offense. They did answer our digital governance and US-EU alignment impact, which are all implicit answers to Turns case. So it obviously was not dropped. We are not reliant on the global adoption of CCS. It's about greening the supply chain, which is meaning what we have a link turn to their warming scenario, but they don't have a link turn to ours. We said US alone solves. This is insufficient. It doesn't out. Their in turn does not outweigh alignment. They have no card. The development economies outweigh the two biggest powers in the world. Voting on the term requires you to explain how Southeast Asia is more geopolitically relevant than all of US-EU trade, which mitigates the impact risk of their scenario. We've agreed with the neg that yes, short-term trade would be reduced. There's no impact to that since development is long and structural, and their evidence speaks to development of failed states and creation of complex organized crime operations, which obviously doesn't occur as soon as the plan is announced. Countries will be export more green steel long-term because the entirety of US-EU countries will be purchasing steel from said developing economies. So the plan expands markets for them, and exports would continue. Remember, wanting our instead of relevant lines from wanting to demonstrative no link, which we get because they can do it too, which invert speech time, and what increasing US-EU trade does not mean we stop trade with developing econ, which answers their links. Want to see Bradberg says it's a transatlantic market, reducing dependency on Russia and China, but not developing nations. The next line says that French is motivated by concerns about dependency on China, but not other countries. The democracies are good. One example of COVID does not mean democracies are bad in all instances. This links back to them if their argument is that developing economies are key because those countries are not intrinsically authoritarian. It's not offense because we're not. All causes don't overwhelm when our evidence is so hyper-specific that Gaza is the reason and the only thing that matters for development and trade.
5 judges. We have 2 debaters and 2 debaters. Congratulations to everyone on the amazing NDT so far and for making it to the Octos. The decision is unanimous for Kansas. What do y'all want to do?
Full decision.
All right. Anyone else want to start?
You're the subject of most of this.
I'm the subject of most of this debate. I think friendshoring undermines economic growth of developing countries, which complicates global governance against existential risks. I think this is bigger than warming, which is still pretty big. I think the next DA turns warming by reducing the resources available to developing countries, which cuts back against the ash global solvency plan. The 2AR makes a valiant effort, but I think you're running up against a brick wall that I think Kansas is right that you have more or less dropped the DA in the 2AC. I will caveat this by the 1 and C being hard to flow at times, and so, like, if the 2AC 1AR was like, we don't know what the 1 and C was saying, I'm not sure I would disagree with that. But it's very clear the 1 and C read development solves extinction card, so like, there's clearly an impact in the 1 and C that I don't think the 2AC answers. There are attempts to explain why you get to make no new link arguments. I don't think they're right. I understood the 2AC to be saying friendshoring solves US-EU cooperation, but like that doesn't answer their need. Based on my reading of the 1AC cards and NEG explanation, my understanding of friendshoring is that steel and aluminum supply chains become concentrated in the US and the EU, and we might in fact erect trade barriers to other places producing steel that don't meet emission standards, which feels like a pretty straightforward link to the NEG argument. I have more link details, but I'll leave those for conversation with the other judges. I think the NEG is really far ahead on democracies fail to cooperate effectively and don't provide global public goods, so I should be skeptical of the ability for the US and the EU to manage global crises. I should instead prioritize developing nations that are still really globally numerous and dispersed. I thought this was a really good part of the 2NR, and the 2AR was like, why does Southeast Asia matter? I thought the 2NR was very good on why Southeast Asia matter. The case, I think warming is pretty big. It is tough to only go for impact defense in the 2NR. Despite my Twitter beef with your author Patrick Brown, I think the NEG does a good enough job mitigating the risk of the impact. My basic takeaway of the warming page is that I think it's reasonable to focus the 2AR on the nuclear deterrence impact, but you are banking too much on no link to the NEG defense. And I think the NEG defense does answer your impact in a couple of different ways. One is all the resource war stuff. Your 1AC card about nuclear deterrence is very much about food shocks and resource conflicts and stuff like that. It's not about like the North Korean sphere of influence. Second thing is like, if capabilities are destroyed, we're less likely to fight, we're more likely to cooperate. Like, I think this also applies to your impact. And so I don't think you sort of get out of the NEG defense as much as you would like. Although I think you are quite good on no adaptation. You're not seniors. I have really enjoyed judging you and hope to see you back.
I can go over the next fantastic season, y'all. I mean, always a pleasure to watch you debate, and you were really, really good at this one too. I thought you didn't drop the effector, and I was pretty heavily apt on counterplan and DA stuff, and so like maybe the block changes or something like that, but I think basically the biggest thing I differed from Callahan on was I thought Bristol Morgan was a lot lower than he did. I think you basically didn't answer not anthropogenic in the next block. The 2NR and 2NC both say it should have like an outsized bias against thinking about forming impacts. The Brown and Netsky Knights, the very climate impacts that your Macintosh evidence says is important for deterring nuclear safety or for ensuring nuclear safety, like food, drought, floods. The card says it's like highly unlikely to be the results of carbon dioxide. The 2NR also says I should be healthy skeptical of any epistemological claim based on tipping points and the impact of warming due to like activism bias. I don't think the negative evidence is like fantastic on this question, but the 2AR's answer to this is like our evidence is from PhDs. Their evidence is also from a PhD. It just makes me think about the way that I should read your PhDs differently than theirs, and I thought they just want like less impact to anthropogenic warming than you want to the case. I will just agree a little bit on like I don't look at the doc, but like the debate is going on, so I just didn't hear the link to the argument in the 1NC. It was like unclear in the transition between flows, and so I think that was the like issue where I could have picked up on. But I guess you all look at the document, so like probably you just understood this was a turn. So just a little bit more clarity there from you all would help, just like as you transition between pages. Let's see, anything else I want to add? Not too much. I thought maybe there was some way of the 2AR push on using this like Doge cuts nuclear safety stuff to like complicate, maybe like adding an additional layer of try or die to only preventing warming can solve nuclear safety. Like if nuclear safety is just hosed right now, like maybe only climate change can solve our cases, something like that. But maybe actually the better thing to do is for the 1AR to extend conditionality, cut some solvency arguments against the counter plan, one less prolific impact card, and give yourself another out. So like the 200 hours has spent so much time in this debate being like, yeah, like our impact turn isn't fantastic, but like here's how you should evaluate the debate, do a lot of instruction on like how judges should think about things, and like lowering the amount of time that 2R gets to do that, and applying that to like maybe conditionality would help you more in trying to get out of this impact turn for 2R.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think I sat a little bit with just this question. I do think that the app gets to, make the argument that your alignment, position solves the terminal impacts of their stuff. I didn't think it did for just a few reasons. So one, I thought that they had sort of a reverse causal DA to your form of governance. So locking out developing countries means that there are greater conditions for all of these problems that sort of everyone is talking about, to the arguments that democracies are worse than autocracies in public goods distribution. So this example about how Trump's response to COVID really sucked, but China was able to distribute public resources to other countries. And then three, I thought it was difficult for the app to kind of ever access an argument about their form of governance being good for developing countries, because the thesis of the link itself is that developing countries get excluded from trade broadly, right? So I think that sort of insulates the DA from all of the things that you're saying. Agree that there are a few I sort of thought there just needed to be a few cuts to the warning advantage to make the risk of the turn outweigh it, and there were vis-a-vis the adaptation and invite stuff. I also, gave them a little bit of this argument that if warming makes nuclear capabilities suck a little bit, then that means there's probably not going to be a nuclear extinction because we don't have those capabilities. Very small cut, but I think another thing that sort of brought that advantage. We're 3 for 3 on difficult to flow, the link to the link turn in the 1C, so totally agree with that there, and that might be an area for the 1AR to sort of explore how to resuscitate some of the ways that you're answering this position. I will say that a little bit as an aside, there's a technical mistake made here in the 2AC, but aside from that, the activating in this debate was phenomenal, really, really high level stuff. So you should be very proud of your tournament, your performance both in this debate and throughout the year. You've got a lot to build on.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm going to add is that the reason why I thought the development term was especially large was because your attempts at saying the app solved it largely relied on functionally just reasserting the fact that the app solved GASA, etc., and appealing to your cards, which then, I look at, it's all relying on democracies being preferable to authoritarians, and I think the next debate is just ahead on democracies suck at resolving all these problems. The only warning you have is special interests capturing authoritarians. They've said that's equally applicable, and then have a couple more warrants and an empirical that even speaks to the disease impact itself that is answered by the 1AR. So I think that's decisively neg, makes that large, retweet everything else that
Let's see. I'll just add a couple things too. Definitely, I think condo extension just put a little more pressure on the 2R. I don't know, Callahan, you're going to lose him automatically in condo. You might want to meet with automatically, so that's a little straight off. Stupak can be persuaded on condo. I'm getting old. Yeah, right.
I'm very good for being out here.
I'm persuadable on condo, so like Jordan. But yeah, so it's basically just debate for Stupak if you have to go. And you can do it. I kind of thought that was going to happen a little bit, just with no pressure on Meg, etc. A couple of things about the link that I think are interesting and relevant for the impact turn. I definitely didn't, I will sort of say the flowability, I said friend shoring fails flowed, and then development stops extinction. So my brain was there seems to be something going on here. You know what I mean? So then I cross-X, just, you know what I mean? You all gotta figure it out, what's the link here? I was what's the link? As far as how the debate went down on the link stuff, there were a couple of things that altered maybe my assessment of it. One is there was a small technical concession. The 2R says don't allow re-highlighting because that adds speech time, right, for the affirmative evidence. And I'm generally just totally okay with re-highlighting the other team's evidence. But I thought this was interesting because if it's your evidence, right, you could then read a very, you have a very long card that makes a series of different arguments and then just start re-highlighting the parts that are relevant. This wasn't super debated out. I was this could be really interesting. So this wasn't oh, sorry, you just don't get the argument. I was just it was a thing that they said and then you dropped it. And, technical concession being might be. But I did like read through your cards, and I think that they do establish a solid link to the kind of like friend-shoring argument the other judges have already spoke about, aluminum and steel, et cetera. I thought you all were doing a nice job, though, kind of like debating the impacts and the impact comparisons and stuff. The warming situation, I think it's unfortunate for you that they're not anthropogenic ground card. Also specifically says like droughts and flooding, et cetera, which seems to be the feature, the key internal link that you're going for in terms of like nuclear deterrence. I think you're underselling your evidence in a weird way in terms of like nuclear deterrence. You're like, the bases will flood, which like your card does say, but then like the whole, like the security context of nuclear deterrence is really what the evidence is talking about. So it's like, it's not just that like this one Air Force base is in like Nebraska, I think is what your evidence is talking about, which yeah, Nebraska's flat and does flood a pretty bunch, right? Like, it's not just that they're gonna have flooding, but that the whole feature of climate change is gonna exacerbate all the tensions that then create the problems. So I thought that maybe you could like describe the internal link in a way that wasn't as susceptible to their internal link defense. But as it went down, I was like, okay, well, the base are gonna flood anyway, and humans are not really related to that, so I don't know how that solves it necessarily. So it's like a decent hit on the warming stuff. Yeah, great debate. They all graded really well. We're judging on the future. Good luck, Kansas. So.
Yeah.
I'm happy to look up for this one. So.
Thank you. Okay. I appreciate all the feedback. It makes a lot of sense. So do you think, this is for everyone, ideal 1AR on the turn is 1 and C, not flowable, we get new answers to the impact as well, or just the link?
I just didn't understand. I know they certainly read development software.
Yeah, okay.
So I think the link would be really where
So that justification for answers to the link, like read cards about like all clauses inevitable, all that stuff.
Well, I think that allows you to recontextualize like how the app supports friend-shoring only from Russia and China. So like, maybe you can see you reading another card that's like all of the steel supply chains are actually just in China and Russia, and the plan doesn't cause the supply chains to be different from any other country. That's probably just like wrong. So like maybe you just don't have that card. So
I'm gonna add one thing to this too. You have like conceded the development card, but there's not like a good impact to that, like terrorism and like all the other things. So if you're just like, the EU solves terrorism. You just find whatever best card you have for the US and EU cooperation solves terrorism.
We can read other
that,
like add-ons.
Right? Yeah, so read your internal link take out. He's like, look, the one like even the 2AC overview, he's like, we solve a laundry list of things like terrorism, climate change, pandemics, disease, you know what I mean? Like, just read whatever best card you have on that. Because the block, I thought, like, block didn't read, like additional impact cards for these things.
So
or additional development impact cards.
Okay. So plan solves new in the 1AR, whatever, plus like add-ons to AF that internal link us to their impact. That makes
Another
sense.
thing would be helpful is just like steel, not steel development.
Yeah, okay.
Because actually what you only get to is reshoring steel and aluminum.
Yes, there are other, like, okay.
Every other sector.
Okay, that makes sense.
Part of that is like, you could say like, this is just like a missing internal link between their chain. Like, they haven't actually presented steel key to developing countries' growth. If that's missing,
Like
the
incomplete
app obviously
argument,
gets to say like, it was missing, so we didn't answer it.
Okay, that makes sense. Vivek mentioned AF leaning on competition question. I thought, since the turn was obviously more threatening given the concession in the 2AC, the 1AR should only have been competition. It's been like, well, I don't know, maybe 430 on the turn in the case, just to know like the DA counterplay not competitive. Do you think that would have been a strategic 1AR, maybe with Kondo as well? Or do you think the 1AR that we gave with better answers to the turn in the form of like 1AR new answer justification was better?
I would think that this 1AR format was just like one less pro card, a little bit less of the salt deficit and then traditionality. Like, I was athleting mentally.
Yes,
I don't know
obviously
what,
debated
2NR would
yes.
have done, and like they seem to sound really confident in the strategy, so like I wouldn't have risked that on only competition in the 1AR and 430 on the
Okay.
Well, it seems to me like the only like words that the only other thing in the 1AR is this: the EPA doesn't have resources and like relevant data about steel. And that's but that was like I don't know 10 seconds. Yes, I would shave that, but I don't know if that like radically restructures the speech or anything.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Flow thing, pen time, or just not clear at all?
I think a little bit of pen time, a little bit of quietness, like you're kind of far away. You're very clear. Like no one's saying you're not clear. It's just like this transition between the flow. I just didn't hear what the link argument was. I know that you read a card, and then I heard the next card very clearly. So probably a little bit of everything that you just said, including maybe just like noticing that there's five of us in this kind of echoey room. Maybe pull your table a little forward to help.
I think the tag of the card maybe too, to be honest with you. Like the tag is friend-shoring won't secure supply chains, but will reverse interdependence and build those developing economies. So like, I was like, okay, like friendshoring kind of doesn't work, supply chains. Right, do you know what I mean? Like, some part it's like, destroys developing economies. You know?
It sounds like defense.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I'm just like even just when I read it, it's like, then it's like, oh, that's obviously a term. Like,
Maybe for me, I definitely, it was not just that card, I had other, it's in the speech where it was like a card to tag transition thing. It like wasn't clear that you transition to the next tag, so it all just sounded like cards. But again, maybe that's just like far away.
Yeah, got it.
So it's like not a,
it's the top of the page.
Temperature check on this DOE strategy. Are they cooking us?
I think like it's fine. I just feel like this double bind between can the EPA regulate energy, and if they can, then earn, and if they can't, then they're self deficit because they can't have your carbon intensity on things like coal, if they can't touch energy at all. It seems really odd how you like wiggle your way out of that. Maybe you have a response to the tunar, but it just seemed to me like that was the key question. And so if you can resolve that, then I feel fine with the strategy.
I think if you just make it clear in the 2NC, precise distinction, maybe one or two more cards, and like, you know, if afterwards you read them, and like the distinction is relatively clear, like, then it's fine.
I wanted to hide those.
yeah, so like for me, for example, you say there are different statutory authorities. What are they?
Yeah.
Like what is the authorizing statute for the energy policy versus environmental policy? Like, even just a little more clarity on that. I do not think this act is energy policy. Steel production is not energy.
But they wrote it in the plan, so.
Yeah, they wrote the plan. Isn't your new bit that you do the coal piece? Yeah. They lost the T energy policy, and now their new bit is they do coal.
Oh, because industrial metals is like,
Yeah.
coal's not a metal.
So I think
like they read a carbon.
for me,
It's
it would
like
be
industrial
firm
metals.
to do the counter plan with just like the textual distinction between energy and non-energy policy. But like firm do both, right? That like is the question of whether or not then the plan could just be mostly, right? Let EPA, like they're like, the Department of Energy is like, hey, we're gonna do some stuff, and the EPA's like, we got this, folks, like no worries, right? That's maybe more threatening, and you gotta go through like your turf battles, like like take out that and have like a better impact to it maybe. But,
I think somewhere, like 1C or 2C, you need just a better competition card because I thought the cross-X didn't go great. And so it's like you just need the thing to refer back to. It's like our X card makes this distinction clear. And so it's like, you know, I get wanting to hide it a little bit later, but I think having it earlier just makes the cross-X sequences go a little bit cleaner for you. And I think that helps make the story easier to explain objectives.
yeah, like the statutory basis, right? Like, energy policy has to be the Department of Energy. Like, here's our like. Yeah.
Then my last question: should the 2NC have red terminals?
To develop it.
Mm-hmm.
No. Copper pit? Do you just like not have more cards? I kind of thought they didn't have to say anything about it. I was like, they kind of dropped the camera about it, as we see.
The counter? I don't know if we have any cards.
Let's do the counter plan.
Industrial metals is expensive.
Well, okay, the answer is, but like, yeah, but like, if copper is an industrial metal, I think the ask code.
We would go for copper.
What's up?
Go for copper.
In which case, I don't But like, if you have a pile on copper is an industrial metal, I think that loses. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe you don't have that pile.
The other thing was just like it doesn't affect the value chain because it's not mining, but obviously it does, right? If you like, you can measure the emission standard, it all comes from mining, so it has to still upstream.
Great. Cool. So thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good debate. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Well, the nuclear safety things, you're like if you had said Joe cuts everything nuclear safety related, it complicates their ability to have that as a unique advantage.
That's true.
Yeah. There's no decision to skip it. I don't think we're gonna have a decision.
Oh, not purchase.
So infinite concept.
Objection.
Yeah, I know.
I think he's an anti
I have just gotten so radicalized by negative shenanigans. I thought the negative fine. I did a little bit of that. I'm getting more out of it.
I know Will's out.
Great tournament, great year.
I want to translate this too.
Oh yeah, why not?
Oh wait.
Your theory is very
Wait, are you saying about this debate?
Oh, I wasn't talking about it, but yeah, okay.
We said physics on the other DA, and
Yeah.
yeah.
That's true.
Oh yeah, you can buy that.
Yeah.
Policy making something.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all for judging.
Thanks.
We said intrinsic supplies to the turn as well.
Against
Where's the top of my stand?
Yep. Even though we had,
Oh, this is one.
like, had a million TCs.
Oh, whose is this?
I'm assuming I don't need to be on record for my thoughts about if you've said it.
No, obviously not.
You would have gone con.
We wouldn't have gotten him on
Oh,
content.
yeah.
But you would have gotten the
Well, no, we would have lost.
Well, we thought about it when we saw the panel, but then we were just like, there's no point, so then we stopped flowing. That was a bit of an issue.
What is this?
Oh, is there a
I assume some of the class was, it's us